Jacques, I didn't realize that you were Jewish. So where were you accepted by ROS?
The province of Belgium.
Okay.
And in the province of Belgium and Holland, you know, the Royal Lord of Scotland in Holland goes back to 1750s.
Wow.
Yes. And you see, there are a number of things I don't understand, because I watched last week the presentation by Sovereign Grand Commander of the Ancient and Accepted Rite, Alan Englefield, on the Scottish Rite in England. And he repeated that the required one was that you have to be Christian. But at the time, in the US, it was not like that. So they have added this requirement when it came to England.
I understand.
But I have a funny, I have heard a funny case of ancient and accepted rite in England, where there was a person, a Hindu brother, who applied to join the ancient accepted rite in England. He was refused. Then his son was in India. In India, it's universal. His son became the master. So he said, told his father, come from England down to India. He came down to India, and the person became a member in India. After becoming a member in India, India is in amity with England. So he was able to go back to England and attend as a visitor in England. Okay, they first denied him, but later, you're in amity, so he started. Then they told him, why don't you join? He said, you don't accept me. He said, but as you're already a member in India, you can join England, but first you have to resign from India and join England. So then what happened is that he resigned from India and joined England. So instead of catching the nose like this, he went all the way like this and touched his nose.
But Brother Joseph, we are in amity. We are permitted to attend any chapter, Rose Croix chapter of the Supreme Council of England and Wales.
I'm talking of membership there. I'm talking about a brother who applied, who lives in England, who applied for membership and
No, I understood. I understood what you're saying, but he should be able to have attended meetings without doing anything.
Yes, you have to be invited. Eh? You have to be
invited. I mean, you have to be invited, of course. Yeah, you can't just walk in. You don't have any right to walk.
You cannot just force yourself into a chapter.
But
you have to be invited.
And you can't get
invited. There have been multiple instances of Indian brethren belonging to the Indian Rose Croix who have attended meetings in England. Obviously by invitation, but there lots of, it's very commonplace.
Okay, brothers, I will use my power of moderator, and as we are already, I mean, we will have plenty of time to discuss that later. So with your permission, I will now mute everyone. There are some other brothers trying to enter as always, but we have given 5 more minutes for latecomers, and let's start launch. And while I'm introducing our guest again, we'll have them enter the room. So once again, this is being recorded. We are already on live. I just shared the link in the public chat. So anyone who wants to share it, please do so. Welcome, brothers, participants, sisters, to Sapere Aude lecture number 67 this time. In continuation of the series of our lectures, Sapere Aude, we have the honor to host again Brother John Hairston Bay, who is a member of University Lodge number 141, under the Most Worshipful Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons of the state of Washington. Brother Hairston is the editor of the Quill and the Sword Masonic blog and has been published in several Masonic publications, including the Phylexis magazine, Working Tools magazine, Livingstone, Washington Masonic Community Monitor, the Centennial in New York, and the Prince Hall Masonic Journal, Illinois. He is a contributing writer to the Phylexis Anthology, the greatest Prince Hall Masons of the 20th century. He is a life member honorary fellow of the Phylexis Society, an active member of the Philaletes Society, the Grand College of Rites, the Masonic Society, and the Scottish Rite Research Society. He is the co-founder of the Golden Phoenix Society, an esoteric-based community of researchers and lecturers. Brother Hairston Bay enjoys his life in Seattle, Washington, and traveling abroad in research and writing. Later on, I will have a pleasure to share 3 links in the public chat, just to make sure everyone understands why the 3 links. There will be book available for domestically in United States. There will be examination of white papers, which Brother John will be presenting today. And there will be another 3rd link, which Brother John, having listened to international brethren here during last lecture, set up for international outreach. And if you choose that link, you can, with moderate shipping costs, acceptable, affordable ones, will be able to get his book to you. So, having said that, we have presented Brother John. I will just remind everyone that last time we spoke about the African Lodge, its beginning, the date was very interesting, and all the conclusions deriving from that date. And today, our topic is examination of the white paper, politics in Masonic research. So I will remind everyone that we don't discuss politics, we don't discuss religion, we don't discuss interjurisdictional issues, and we are a public group allowing males and females, Masons and non-Masons, and any opinion shared either by speaker, by myself, moderator, or by any participant is of individual nature and does not stand for any institution as such, unless that is being announced. And we are all here as individuals who want to learn more about Freemasonry and all around it. Having said that, it is my pleasure, Brother John, to welcome you once again and give the floor. I will mute now myself, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Brother David. So part 2 was supposed to be a continuation of the start and origin of Africa Lodge number 1. Luckily, Brother David provides so much time, you know what I mean, that I was able to get through the entire lecture and be able to present the information and the findings of my first book, Landmarks of Our Fathers. Today, I wanted to do a little something different because I saw a lot of persons who were asking about, was the book accepted by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, in which I did answer no. And I talked a little bit about when I first produced the manuscript. Before I published, I sent my manuscript to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts for them to review it and to be able to respond, to it. At that time, they had no comment on the book whatsoever. But in 2018, they put together a special historical committee and then wrote a white paper, which is a 16-page response to my book, and presented it to the Conference of Grandmasters. I did not get a copy of that, but someone else sent me a copy of the white paper. And after reading it, 2 months later, I produced the book examination of the white paper, which was a response to the white paper in order to be able to continue the discussion on the start and origin of Africa Lodge #1. So I just want to start sharing my screen because I want to get right into it. Okay. And hopefully everybody can see that. So one of the first things that I noticed when I received the white paper, because the type of researcher that I am, I read everything that's in a paper or whatever is presented to me for information. And the first thing that I noticed was at the top of the white paper, first page, was their letterhead. The letterhead, as you can see highlighted here, states organized 1808. Now, this was very interesting to me because I actually received the archive of Africa Lodge #1, 459 in both Boston and Philadelphia directly from the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts because I made a call asking. Once I learned where these particular documents were housed, I wanted to get these documents so I could be able to review them for myself. After calling for about 2 weeks, they mailed me out a microfilm with all these documents in which I had the opportunity to review. So when I saw this particular year for the organization of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, I was sort of surprised because these particular documents that I now have in my possession were already in the possession of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And what I saw was this particular date could be brought into question right in the letterhead. So right before I even got into the paper, I'm looking at a questionable date in the letterhead. They stated the fact that they were organized in 1808. When you go into the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, you will see this particular mural here on the wall. And a part of that mural, you will see right here where it says Mother Grand Lodge, which I found interesting as well. Also, there is a banner that hangs in the Grand Lodge building of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And if you can see here, and I'm going to try to blow this up just in case anyone can't really see, you will see it says Jurisdiction of Massachusetts constituted 1791. So what we see here is 2 dates, one on the letterhead and one on the banner, in which the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts states the fact that was the start and origin of their Grand Lodge. So now this raises a few questions regarding the Constitution date declared on the banner hanging, which is 1791, and also the letterhead that says organized 1808. Now, if Africa Lodge was subordinate to the Grand Lodge of England in 1792, how could they have been an independent Grand Lodge in 1791? There wasn't a Grand Lodge in 1791. And further evidence of this fact is a letter written by Prince Hall to the Deputy Grand Master Roland Holt, dated November the 16th, 1791. Now, according to one of the traditions before it was obviously changed, which we can see reflected in their letterhead, because the banner said 1791, they believe that their Grand Lodge started on June the 24th, 1791. But here we have a letter from Prince Hall dated November the 16th, 1791, where he says, "Dear sir, I embrace this opportunity to acquaint you that we sent by the bearer, our beloved Newport Davies, a letter to our worthy Deputy Grandmaster." So we have Prince Hall in November the 16th, 1791, acknowledging Roland Holt as the Deputy Grandmaster. And if we understand English Freemasonry, they have a Grandmaster, but it is the Deputy Grandmaster that sort of runs the day-to-day. And it says, together with 1 guinea for charity to the Grand Lodge. So my question was, well, how did they get 1791 if we're looking at a letter from Prince Hall to the Deputy Grand Master giving charity to the Grand Lodge of England. So that brought into the question the 1791 date. What you're looking at now is the 1792 quarterly communication charity and hall fund listing for the Grand Lodge of England. This was actually out in 1792. So when we look at it, we find Africa Lodge, Boston, New England, 459, listed as a subordinate lodge of the Grand Lodge of England. In this particular document, let me blow this up so we can see the date, because I want you to see the date, is April 18th, 1792. So if there was a Grand Lodge for Boston, Prince Hall, in 1791, in June, we have a letter that, dated November the 16th, 1791, in which Prince Hall is stating that he sent charity to the Grand Lodge. And now we have them listed on an April the 18th, 1792 quarterly communication, listed as a subordinate lodge to the Grand Lodge of England. Again, that's them listed. Number 459, Africa Lodge, Boston, New England. Now, in 1798, we have another letter that was written by Prince Hall. And it states where he says, I'm sorry to inform you of the death of our dear brother Newport Davies, which was the one that he said on November the 16th was sent with the letter and the charity, who died on his passage to London last winter, by whom I sent you a sum charges delivered on St. John's Day, June 24th, which I believe you have not received, with a small sum of money for charity to the Grand Fund. So here we have these documents by Prince Hall himself. We have documents with the Grand Lodge of England in their quarterly communication that shows and reflects that Africa Lodge was still, up to this date, 1798, was still a subordinate lodge under the Grand Lodge of England Moderns. So the question was, how can you have jurisdiction of Massachusetts instituted or constituted in 1791? Now, another portion of the letter is very important. And the reason why we need to know this was because the narrative, the traditional narrative, is that the Grand Lodge, whether they choose the date 1791 or the date 1808, they state that this particular Grand Lodge, Africa Grand Lodge, on either of these dates was formed by three lodges. One, Africa Lodge, number 459 of Boston. Two, Africa Lodge, number 459 of Philadelphia, and Hiram Lodge, number 3 of Providence, Rhode Island. Okay, that is the legend. The legend is the Grand Lodge was formed by three lodges, one in Boston, one in Philadelphia, one in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, what we need to look at is these names. William Power of Providence, Fortin Trustin of Ditto, meaning from Providence, George Hill of Ditto, Providence, and Prince Wright, Ditto, of Providence. These particular four brothers, and they said, we have entered into the lodge since year 92, the following brother. And they gave this list of brothers, of which 4 of them were from Providence, Rhode Island. Now, my question is, if they were created by 3 lodges, and one of them in Providence, which went by the name of Hiram Lodge number 3, then why are 4 brothers from Providence being initiated into the Lodge of Boston rather than the lodge in Providence, Rhode Island? So now what we have to do is question, was actually there a Hiram number 3 in Providence, Rhode Island active at the time of 1792? So when we look at that, there's another question that is raised. How can it be formed by 3 lodges when there was no brother from Providence being entered in that lodge in Providence, but rather we're traveling to Boston to be initiated in the Boston Lodge? And here we have the proof. This is the listing of the brothers who had been entered in the lodge. And this is a part of the letter that was written on May 24th, 1798. And he was giving a listing of the brothers since 1792. Okay, so now that brings into question the legend. So there obviously was not 3 lodges. There was only 2 lodges existing, that in Boston and the other in Philadelphia. Now, we want to ask, where did the 1791 date come from that we saw on the banner? The answer is simple: why they chose this particular date. To assume for themselves the role as the Mother Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, as we see in the mural, and I showed the piece where it said Mother Grand Lodge. Now, we know, according to this particular document, this is the 1792 proceedings of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And at the heading, you can see Grand Lodge at Concert Hall, Boston, Monday, the 19th March, 1792. Okay, so the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts was actually formed. And when I say the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, some research circle call them mainstream. Some people will say predominantly white Grand Lodge of Massachusetts was formed on March the 19th, 1792. So therefore, if you say you were formed on 1791, you could claim the title as being the Mother Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, because you would have been formed before March the 19th, 1792. But as we're seeing, according to the very records and letters written by Prince Hall, there was no Grand Lodge in 1791 because they were still a subordinate lodge under the Grand Lodge of England. Okay. Now, so they read, after the death of Prince Hall on December, and this comes from the history of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, written by Ray T. Coleman, who is the grand historian, and I believe at this time emeritus, who wrote what we can call the face of the traditional narrative. After the death of Prince Hall on December the 4th, 1807, the brethren were eager to form a Grand Lodge. On June the 24th, 1808, they organized Africa Grand Lodge with lodges from Philadelphia, Providence, and Boston. Now, if there are records available, here's the question. Here's the questions, because we want to logically look at these particular statements and look to see if they have any evidence or proof to them. Now, if there are records available for Africa Lodge, and there are, can this event be found in those records? June the 24th being St. John's Day, there should be proceedings of a Grand Lodge convention in the records of Africa Lodge. After 1808, if Africa Lodge number 459 and the lodges of Philadelphia and Providence formed a Grand Lodge, we should also find this in the African Lodge number 459 records, right? Which is of Philadelphia, which I also have those as well. Now, if there was a Grand Lodge constituted in Boston under the name of Africa Grand Lodge, we should find no subordinate lodge under that Grand Lodge writing to or contributing anything to another Grand Lodge but Africa Grand Lodge. But we already saw in 2 letters in which Prince Hall stated he was giving charity to the Grand Lodge of England. Okay? Now, this is the document in which they attempted to base the 1808 date. This comes straight from the records of Africa Lodge, handwritten, December the 28th, 1807. What you will see, and I'm gonna blow it up. I want you to see the date, and I want you to see what's going on here. If you look at the top of it, it says Boston, December the 28th, 1807. The officers of Africa Lodge took their, not African Grand Lodge, but African Lodge, took their stations for the ensuing year. And here we see Neo Prince, the Nero Prince, the first one, Grand Master in the East. Now, if you look at the rest of these particular titles, you got James Nickerson, but he's the senior warden, not a grand senior warden. James Denny, junior warden, not a grand junior warden. Senior deacon, junior deacon, chief steward, second steward, outside Tyler. And these are sort of, because these are still, those are not positions that you will find at this time in Prince Hall. Chief steward, second steward, outside Tyler, inside Tyler. This is an interesting document when we look at it on face. But we see where Nero Prince is listed as a Grand Master, and the date being December the 27th, December the 28th, 1807. Remember, Prince Hall had already passed. He passed on December the 4th, 1807, okay? So this is the document in which they attempt to base, the whole record dealing with the 1808 date, okay? So now, Nero Prince is called the Grand Master as well. This continues to prove that Grand Master and Right Worshipful Grand Master were interchangeable in the officer's designation of Africa Lodge. So one cannot use the term Grand Master as a factor in determining whether Africa Lodge was a Grand Lodge, because the term was being used as early as 1778. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to blow this up because this is a part of the document, which was the registry, right? And what you see is Boston, March 6, 1778, and under right here, where you see the worthy and amiable Grand Master John Batt. And under the master's column right here, if you can see that, it says Prince Hall, and he's listed as Grand Master 1778. So if they're saying that the term Grand Master being used will be the determining factor or variable in being able to say that there was a Grand Lodge, well, can you say that there was a Grand Lodge in 1778? Because this is what they were going by when they were saying Worshipful Master. You understand? It's the same term. And even in the 1795 document of Jeremy Belknap, he stated that Prince Hall was a Grand Master of that lodge. Now, what you're looking at now is the June the 14th, because these are the minutes of Africa Lodge meetings, okay? And this particular group of meetings is dated June the 14th to December the 4th, 1808, okay? All of these are meetings. You'll see Boston, June the 14th, 1808, October the 22nd, 1808, November the 1st, 1808, November the 9th, 1808, November the 10th, 1808, December the 4th, 1808. But what I want to focus on is the first two, because the first one is June the 14th. Remember, they're stating on June the 24th, that a Grand Lodge was instituted out of Africa Lodge and became Africa Grand Lodge, with 3 constituting lodges in Boston, Philadelphia, and Providence. The issue is, when we look at the minutes of Africa Lodge, we see the first for Boston, June the 14th, 1808. And they say chose John Cooper, John Shorter, and Walter Martin a committee to pay out of the fund $8 for the use of the room. Now, the interesting thing is the next meeting is October the 22nd, 1808. There ain't even a meeting on June the 24th, 1808. And we're talking about meetings lined up as they happen in their record books right here. There is no June 4th, 1808 meeting even listed. The question is, if there was a Grand Lodge formed on June the 24th, 1808, which is reflected, their date organized in the very letterhead of their rebuttal to my book in 1808, we should find it listed in the minutes. But when we look at the minutes, we don't even find a June the 24th meeting being held. The next meeting after June the 14th is October the 22nd. So we have to wonder, where did this date come from? The reason why they had to change from the 1791 date to the 1808 date was because of this letter that was actually presented from the United Grand Lodge of England, dated April the 12th, 1960. Okay, and it's to a brother, Edward R. Carman. Okay, and it says, "Dear Brother Grand Secretary, Negro Masonry, in reply to your letter," I just want to blow it up too so everybody can read it. I know it's kind of hard, but I just want you to read the body. It says, "In reply to your letter of 6 April, I write to inform you that Africa Lodge, warranted at Boston in 1784 as Lodge number 459 on the roll of Modern Grand Lodge of England, was dropped from the roll of the United Grand Lodge of England at the time of its formation in 1813, presumably for non-payment of dues since the year 1778 and for failure to communicate with the Grand Lodge since that date. Prince Hall was never appointed provincial Grand Master of any territory, and the warrant of Constitution of 1784 conferred no power on any member of Africa Lodge to constitute other lodges or to create a Grand Lodge." Now, what I do want to say about the dropping from the rolls, when the United Grand Lodge of England was formed, it was formed out of the Antient Grand Lodge and the Modern Grand Lodge of England. When they came together in 1813, there were multiple lodges in America that were dropped from the rolls. Africa Lodge was not the only one. They even dropped lodges, you know what I mean, that we could consider white. So this wasn't a racial thing. It wasn't anything like that. They were just purging the rolls and reorganizing the numbers of those particular lodges. And if they received no communication from those lodges, they just erased them for the rolls. So this was not something that was an isolated incident. It was happening to lodges in America that were under both of these particular Grand Lodges. I wanted to make sure that we put that on the record. But what was very important was the fact that in 1791, the aegis for saying that there was a Grand Lodge in 1791 was because they believed that there was a dispensation given to Prince Hall in 1791 to be provincial Grand Master. The question is, there was already a provincial Grand Master in Massachusetts under the Grand Lodge of England in 1791. Because even Prince Hall, in his letter to the United Grand Lodge of England, or to the Grand Lodge of England, he stated that they received a permit from John Rowe, who at that time was the provincial Grand Master. So why would the Grand Lodge of England issue two dispensations in the same state, in the same city, for provincial Grand Masters? You see? So therefore, they had to change it from 1791, getting away from the banner, and then use the date reflected in the letterhead as 1808. But as we see, that the 1808 date is also questionable according to the very records of Africa Lodge. Now, why would Africa, the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, use 1808? Because in 1791, you would have been the Mother Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. But when that was sort of debunked based on the letter from the United Grand Lodge of England stating that he was never a provincial Grand Master, there was a change to 1808 because there was still the need to be the Mother Grand Lodge. So therefore, they wanted to be the first Grand Lodge of African American Freemasonry. Why? Because on December the 28th, and I want everyone to see this, this is also in the records of Africa Lodge. Like I said, in that microfilm, there are records from both Boston and Philadelphia. This record is from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania's records. And this is dated, I want to blow this one up, December the 28th, if you can see the top, it is December the 28th to 1815. Why? Because at a meeting of past masters held in the city of Philadelphia in the state of Pennsylvania, we, the following brethren, past masters, having met this day, December the 28th, 1815, they formed the Grand Lodge, Africa Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Now, this is the actual formation record. This is the record of the meeting that formed Africa Lodge, Africa Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania, right? So this is very important because we have a definitive record of the formation of a Grand Lodge among African American Masons. This is it. And they said appertaining to the business of appertaining to a Grand Lodge, right? So this is the formation of a Grand Lodge in Pennsylvania dated December the 28th, 1815. And if we look at it, I want to blow this up because I want to make sure we're looking at the name. They said, constitute ourselves into a Grand Lodge known by the name of the African Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons for and in the jurisdiction of North America. Now, this is very important because they're saying that Africa Lodge number 459 of Philadelphia was a part of the constitution of the Grand Lodge in Boston, right? And they're saying that they were a part of this constitution of the Grand Lodge of Boston in 1808, okay? Now, if this is true, why is Pennsylvania claiming the entire jurisdiction of North America, okay? They're claiming the entire jurisdiction, the African Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons for and in the jurisdiction of North America. They are claiming the entirety of North America. Now, what's even more important is when we look at this document, I want to show another name that this was the first name that they called themselves. This Grand Lodge that was formed in 1815 in Pennsylvania, first name was the African Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons for and in the jurisdiction of North America. But here's another name that they were using. I want to blow this up so we can see the name. The name is First African Grand Lodge of North America. So in 1847, at the formation of the National Grand Lodge, there were 3 Grand Lodges present. The first one was African Grand Lodge, but this was in 1847, and we'll talk about that. And then the second one was First African Grand Lodge of North America, and then Hiram Grand Lodge. So what you're looking at is the actual listing of delegates who were at the 1847 convention of the National Grand Lodge. Look at the name that they're using, not African Grand Lodge of North America, but First African Grand Lodge. And still in 1847 was claiming the entirety of the jurisdiction of North America. So my question is, if Pennsylvania, if Africa Lodge number 459 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania was a part of a constitution of a Grand Lodge in 1808, why are they considering themselves to be the first African Grand Lodge? This is more proof that there was no Grand Lodge in 1808. Now, when we look at this record, I'm actually quoting Brother Ray T. Coleman's history that can be found on the website. They said on June 24th, 1808, they organized Africa Grand Lodge with lodges from Philadelphia, Providence, and Boston, right? And then when we look at this, I want to go right down here where it says AGL had been issuing, Africa Grand Lodge, that's what that stands for, had been issuing charters for years, ever since they organized the Grand Lodge in 1808. But they could not prove to New York that they were really a Grand Lodge. And then this was a very important statement. There was no official pronouncement of when the event occurred. And then it says, June 18, 1827, a declaration declaring Africa Grand Lodge free from the government in control. And he's making a quote here. He's making a quote right out of the declaration. And it says, free from the government in control, and this is in 1827, of our Mother Grand Lodge of England. Okay? So here, we have a statement again, because I have that declaration, which was actually a charter that was written by the Brothers of Africa Lodge when they formed themselves into a Grand Lodge for the first time in 1827. And I'll be presenting that document right in a few minutes. But what I want to do is focus on the fact that in 1827, on June 18th, which was the first time that Africa Lodge formed itself into a Grand Lodge, they were still considering themselves to be under the jurisdiction of what they termed our Mother Grand Lodge of England. Okay, so I'm trying to figure out, right in the letterhead, I'm not even in the body of their rebuttal, and I'm already seeing inconsistencies in the very letterhead. So I found it ironic that a paper that was rebutting the actual formation date of a particular lodge would have in their letterhead an inconsistency in the organization date of their own Grand Lodge. So now, when we go here, and it says that further evidence in 1808, of course, New York said, we don't believe you're a Grand Lodge. This was Boyer Lodge in New York, because in 1826, Boyer Lodge approached Africa Lodge and asked them for a charter, in which when they reviewed the charter, they believed that the charter wasn't anything but a facsimile, and so they had to rewrite what was called an independent charter. And I'm going to actually show you the minutes from that meeting where they told them to write an independent charter and give it to New York, because that is the only way that New York would have accepted the charter, because they wanted to accept it from a Grand Lodge and not just another lodge. Okay, now when we look here, this is dated January the 5th, 1824. And what I'm going to prove is that in 1824, Africa Lodge did not view themselves as a Grand Lodge, but as a subordinate to the Grand Lodge of England, okay? Now, this was a letter written from the Brothers of Africa Lodge to the Grand Lodge of England. Right here at the top of it, I want to blow it up again so everyone can see it. This letter, it says, to the Right Worshipful, the Grand Master Warden and members of the Grand Lodge of England. And it says, we, your petitioners, Samson H. Moody, Peter Howard, Abram C. Denneram, John T. Sposeby, John T. Hilton, James Jackson, Zadok Lewis, Samuel Gardner, Richard Porter, Lewis Walker, and other companions who have been regularly exalted to the sublime degree of Royal Art Masonry, right? Now, when we look here, it says right here, and understanding that the 7 degrees is given under the warrant from the Grand Lodge, we therefore humbly solicit the renewal of our charter, to otherwise us legally to confer the same. So here we have another statement from Africa Lodge itself in a letter dated January the 5th, 1824, where they recognize themselves as a subordinate to the Grand Lodge of England because they are petitioning for a renewal of their charter. Now, why would a Grand Lodge be asking, if they were a Grand Lodge in 1808, why are they asking for a renewal of a charter that was given to them that was granted in 1784, but they didn't receive until 1787? Why are they asking for a renewal of that charter? And then further in that statement, but we are permanently established, he says, we have not been able for several years to transmit monies and hold regular communication, but we are permanently established to work conformable to what? Our warrant and book of constitution. So in 1824, if they were recognizing themselves as a Grand Lodge, why would they be asking for a warrant and stating that they will work conformable to that warrant and a book of constitution? The Honorable Joseph A. Walks published on the Phylaxis website the following from Brother George Drayfin, who was another historian. And this was regarding the traditional story. This was regarding the traditional story. On June the 24th, 1808, pursuant to a call from Nero Prince, the deputy Grand Master, representatives of 3 then existing lodges met in Boston and changed the name of the Grand Lodge to Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts in memory of Prince Hall. He states there is no indication in the Prince Hall Masonic book as to the author of this traditional story, but from its contents, it is evidence that the author drew heavily upon Grimshaw and Davis. It is greatly to be regretted that an official publication should include a biography which is both woefully inaccurate and in some cases manifestly untrue. This can only be derogatory of a man whose life requires no false vindication, okay? So there were others. What you're looking at here is the June 18th, 1827 minutes. The June 18th, 27 minutes of Boston, okay? Now, in this particular meeting minutes, you will see that's Boston, June 18th, 1827. That's right at the top there. And when you look, they are talking about New York. And they said, desiring to know what would satisfy their lodge should they give an independent charter to Boyer Lodge. And the lodge unanimously agreed to be satisfied with $200 on the delivery of the charter, okay? And they said they sent the delegation to Boyer Lodge and met in the city of New York for African Grand Lodge number 459. Because at this point, New York was asking for an independent charter. The Boyer Lodge in New York was asking for an independent charter. They did not want a charter from just what they considered a regular lodge. We wanted to come from a Grand Lodge. So what they did was decided to form themselves into a Grand Lodge, write a charter for Boyer, give it to them as an independent charter, and then they even stated that they wanted to write a declaration to be published, right? And they gave this task to John T. Hilton to write this particular charter, okay? Because this is what Ray T. Coleman was actually stating. Now, again, that's the bottom half of it, where he said they granted to Boyer Lodge, number 1, in New York, the independent charter according to the agreement. The worshipful master John T. Hilton was chosen to write and publish the Declaration of Independence, okay? So this Declaration of Independence can be seen right here, and I just want everyone to take a look at it. This is also in the records of Africa Lodge. This was the Declaration of Independence, where you see Declaration of Independence proclaimed by Africa Grand Lodge in the city of Boston Commonwealth, okay? Now, when we look at this document, it was also called a Grand Charter right here, Grand Charter. So this declaration was also meant to be a charter for their Grand Lodge. And this was in 1827. So now we see that there was no Grand Lodge in June the 24th, 1808, but the first time it was June the 18th, 1827, when they declared themselves in their own meeting to be a Grand Lodge, and then created this Grand Charter of Africa Grand Lodge, June the 26th, 1827, okay? And when you look at it, again, that's just the wording. I just want to make sure that everybody could see the wording. And it says Declaration of Independence by Africa Grand Lodge in the city of Boston in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and United States of America through her officers. And then they go through their particular history and says, we do therefore declare ourselves free from said instrument as dated above. And the instrument that they're talking about is the warrant that was given to them or granted on September of 1784, okay? So therefore they were saying, we are no longer under this particular warrant. Now, if they were indeed a lodge, a Grand Lodge in 1808, why would they just now in 1827 be declaring themselves free from a warrant that made them a subordinate lodge to the Grand Lodge of England? And this is just the rest of it right here. Thus, we can see clearly from the records that Brother Ray T. Coleman and those brothers had couched an inaccurate start date in the very letterhead that they used to rebut my work, and then claimed that the organization of their Grand Lodge was in 1808. But what we're looking at in all of these particular records is a contradiction to both the 1791 date and the 1808 date. Now, this is important because what we're looking at is an 1808 organization date that's vested in Masonic politics. And I want to understand the way that I crafted the examination of the white paper. What I did was I published the entire white paper, all 16 pages, right in the front of the book, so that anyone reading my response to them could see the entirety of their argument. And then I took each section by section and addressed it. So therefore, this is the reason why I started with just the letterhead, because that was the first thing that I saw. Organized 1808, and was like, what? How could this be when the very records that is the records of their predecessors that is in my possession show that there was no 1808 date, but rather an 1827 date. Now, we go to the first portion. Like I said, I broke down the paper in the book where they put their arguments or accusations regarding my book. And I want to just take a few of these and just show you what they were stating in their paper, what they had issues with my book. But what I also want to do is to show how when they put this paper together, it will be obvious that they did not read my book thoroughly, that is, and the very sources that they're claiming, they didn't read through those. And I even questioned whether or not they were actually reading the records of Africa Lodge, because what you will see are blatant errors in the paper that they wrote as a rebuttal to my book. And it says, Mr. Hairston, not brother, but Mr. Hairston, takes the position that our founder, Prince Hall, and 14 Immortals were not initiated on the date of March 6, 1775, but on the date of March 6, 1778. We have found that his position is not that of his own research, as he would have you believe, okay? So what they were saying was they thought that I was attempting to take credit as the first person to discover this information. Right? They were trying to tell their readers that I was claiming that this particular work was the first time and I discovered it and it wasn't out before. And so therefore, they're trying to say this is a character flaw in him for trying to take this particular information and make it as if it was his own research, or that he was the first to discover it. And it says, but that it's taken directly from the work of two other writers, highly critical of Prince Hall Freemasonry, John Sherman, librarian of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and Henry Wilson Coyle, editor of Coyle's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Now, right here, this is where, again, politics. This is the reason why I called it politics and Masonic research, because the way a person words things is an attempt to be able to create an appearance of something. And when we're reading things, we have to be very careful about what we're reading and to make sure that we're looking very directly at what's being stated. So he names these two writers, John Sherman and Henry Coyle, and then states these were not just critical of Prince Hall Freemasonry, but were actual haters of our order. Okay, now who was this attested by?
Can I intervene just 1 second?
Yes.
Somebody's microphone is on and I don't see in the list. And that is
microphone is on?
Yeah, and that kind of interrupts the recording. And you, Brother John, had.
Okay.
Was it your TV?
Probably.
No, there is cartoon or something coming in somewhere.
Okay.
Please
turn that down a little bit. Turn it down.
No, there is. Okay, yeah.
Okay, so now what they were attempting to do was utilize them as being haters of Prince Hall Freemasonry and saying, because you took your work from them, you are also a hater of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Okay, Now, the number one thing I want them to understand is when I wrote the book, I was a Prince Hall Mason. Okay. When I actually published the book, Landmarks of Our Fathers, in 2016, I was a Prince Hall Mason under the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Okay. Definitely wasn't a hater of Prince Hall Freemasonry. In fact, most of the researchers and historians in the circles that I've traveled in know that I was a defender of Prince Hall Freemasonry. Now, that's why I said I wanted to question whether they had read my book, because if they did, they would have found this in my preface, where I said, I sent the initial drafts of the paper to various sources, and it was confirmed that I was dealing with a very sensitive issue. I was about to confront what Prince Hall historians had avoided confronting since publishing of John Sherman and Henry Coyle's A Documentary Account of Prince Hall in 1982. With that being said, it did not justify the very issue dealt with in this book was presented in Documentary Account of Prince Hall, and I was quite sure that our beloved elders were knowledgeable of Sherman and Coyle's findings. So first of all, it wasn't as if I was attempting to present the information as mine, or that I was the first one to find this information, because I actually mentioned the very two writers that they were saying that I was attempting to take their work in my preface. I'm not even talking about in the chapters, in the preface of the book. So if they would have read the book, they would have known that I had already acknowledged the persons who had first made these questions, which was John Sherman and Henry Coyle. Then in the court, if you read on in it, it says this author was advised by Phylaxis magazine editor, Brother Alton Roundtree, to look for the work of John Sherman and Henry Coyle. Unable initially to locate and access available copies of their work, a copy of Freemasonry Among Colored People of the USA, written in 1974 by Harold V.B. Voorhees, was obtained. And then I said, down here, this is all in my preface. In 1982, John Sherman and Henry Coyle would publish a book through the Missouri Lodge of Research entitled Documentary Account of Prince Hall and Other Black Fraternal Orders. Their work would also question the March 6, 1775 date and the involvement of Irish Military Lodge number 441. How did you miss this? If you're going to review and rebut my book, you have to read it cover to cover. And then that way, these particular unfounded allegations of me attempting to take someone else's work and claim it as my own, wouldn't have been made. So we could see politics being played in Masonic research. They say, again, this is another part of the paper where they stated Mr. Hairston takes one single page from the archives of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge microfilm files of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, housed in the Library Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and tries to justify his position. This page is questionable one. Now, this is very important because now they're going to talk about this single page that they believe that I took. But anybody reading Landmarks of Our Fathers will see that my bibliography is at least 6 pages long. So it shows you all of the documentation that went into me presenting my conclusions, not just one page, but multiplicity of documents within the Africa Lodge records itself, not just Africa Lodge of Boston, but also Africa Lodge of Philadelphia, as well as other documentation outside and independent of Freemasonry. You see? So all of this went into my work. So them saying that I took one single page was totally, it was a total misrepresentation of my research. And then when we look at the page, they're going to say this page is a questionable one with regards to its date, whereby an illegible 3 or 5 as shown by Harry Davis. And I want us to look at these right here, these subscriptions where they put it as their endnotes or footnotes 3, 4, and 5, because I want to look at those as well. As shown by Harry Davis, Joseph Walks, and Charles Wesley, Prince Hall's life and legacy was changed using marking ink to a very legible 8. Now, here's what they're saying. They're saying that the single document that I used had an illegible 5, and that somebody used modern ink to write a very legible 8. This is their claim, okay? And it says the single sheet that he had presented as documentary evidence of 1778 date for the initiation of Prince Hall and others lists the names of Africa Lodge members. It is in fact questionable document with the date changed in modern ink at the top of the page, okay? Now what I want to do is show them the document that they're attempting to talk about. This is the document that they're attempting to talk about. As you can see, it lists the names of Africa Lodge members who were first initiated, and up here it says March 6th, and as you can see right here, there's this illegible number, okay? There's an illegible number there. Now, in my last lecture, I was talking about, as you can see at the top of that page where it says Master Bat, who made these brothers, and it says March 6th, and then you can see this illegible number right here, right? So this is one of the documents. But this is the document that's on the cover of my book. Now I want to go back and make sure that we're looking at the difference. This is the document that they're saying was my primary evidence, and that the number at the top of the page here was illegible. Therefore, my work is questionable because you can't tell what the date is on the top of the page. The problem is they totally forgot that in the top of my, in the very cover of my book, this is the document that I used. This was the foundation in which began my total research on the traditional story. And at the top of that page, there is a very legible March 6, 1778. So therefore, they're attempting to use, that was the second document. The document that they're talking about was the second document because it showed not only who made them, which was John Bat, no mention of Irish Military Lodge, but it had all 15 of the original members of Africa Lodge, and it shows what they paid John Bat, which is going to be very important a little later in this lecture. So now, as you can see, the very cover of my book, before they opened any pages, they would have saw the document that actually stirred me and inspired me to even do this research. And as you can see, it's a very legible March 6, 1778. So rather than deal with this particular date and deal with this document, they went to this document in an attempt to raise a question about my research. They never dealt with this one. Okay, now, what I also remember when I was telling y'all, I wanted y'all to look at these footnotes because they said Harry Davis is the third one, Joseph Walks is the fourth citation, and Charles Wesley is the fifth, okay? Now, what I want to do is go to their actual citations. When you look at number 3, remember, when you see this one, number 3 is supposed to be Harry Davis. But when we look at number 3, it's Ray T. Coleman, Massachusetts Prince Hall Information Guidebook. Okay? Number 4 is supposed to be Joseph Walks. But when we go to 4, again, Ray T. Coleman, talks of a collection of talks and short articles about Prince Hall Freemasonry. And then they claim Harry Davis, right? Harry Davis. So we have this. Now, here is what I want to do, because they cited Harry Davis, they cited Joseph Walks, and they cited Charles Wesley's work, okay? So here's what I want to do. I want to actually go into those citations, okay, and see if they support their citations in this particular paper, okay? So when we go into Harry Davis's book, in the early history of Freemasonry, when we look at his book, what they were actually attempting to cite was Harry Davis' extract from Jacob Norton's book called Early History of Masonry in Massachusetts, where he said another page begins with Master Brett or Butt. In a line with it, it says March 6, 1775, the 5 very illegible. Okay, so they were using this particular citation in Harry Davis's book. Okay, now when you search Black Square and a Compass by Joseph Walks, there is no mention at all of the document that they're citing. Okay, where they should have looked was Prince Hall Mission, because I actually cited this book and the actual comment that was made by Joseph Walks in the book. It's called Prince Hall Mission, The Rise of the Phylaxis Society. And this is what he says on pages 19 and 20. He said, on Friday morning, September the 16th, 1955, your reporter, in the presence of Dr. James R. Leisure, Grand Master of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, and his committee of 3, did examine the actual and original page of African Lodge record, and we were all surprised and astonished to see that some unknown person had in modern fountain blue pen blue ink scrawled the digit 5 over the original illegible digit, thus making it read 1775. Now, I want us to make sure we're understanding this. In September of 1955, the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and his committee of 3 went to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts to examine the page that they were saying that had the illegible number at the top, okay? When they looked at it, everybody in the room was astonished because a digit 5, not an 8, but a 5, had been written in fountain blue ink on the top of the page so that it would read 1775. However, the inserted digit 5 had been done so crudely that a 10-year-old boy could have detected the 5 as a forgery. So what we're seeing here is the very sources that are being used are actually, can we say, debunking their very own words. They're saying that the page had an 8 written over the 5 when that's not what's stated. And this was actually examined by the Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and his committee in the presence of everyone. And then Walks continues in the same statement. He says, incidentally, this particular panel of film had been projected to the size of 4 feet square on a pure white background in order to determine what might be the last digit. Listen to this. The consensus of opinion of all witnesses is that the part of the last digit visible appeared to be the bottom loop of the digit 8. Okay, so we have a very, very contradictory sources that are contradicting their own words. Now, what happened is they were trying to use earlier works of Joseph Walks and Charles Wesley. The problem is if they would have read later works of these brothers, they would see that they were even questioning the 1775 date. In Prince Hall Masonic Quiz Book, this is what Joseph Walks wrote. Number 7, when and how did Price all become a Mason? He said, this is definitely not known, as documentation showing dates have not been found. Tradition has it that he was initiated March 6, 1775. The famed historian Dr. Jeremy Belknap wrote, having once again mentioned this person, Prince Hall, I must inform you that he is Grand Master of a Lodge of Freemasons composed wholly of blacks and distinguished by the name Africa Lodge. It was begun in 1775, while this town was garrisoned by British troops, some of whom held a lodge and initiated a number of Negroes. Walks continues. It is difficult to ascertain the validity of this. The minutes of Africa Lodge, which have survived, raise so many questions as they answer. Prince Hall Freemasonry accepts the date and counts it beginning from that time. Much confusion exists concerning that period. Now, Charles Wesley, which was one of their citations, they cited his book from 1977, but failed to disclose that he also created a second edition in 1983. What you're looking at now, and I want to blow this up because this is on page 34 of the 1977 first edition of Prince Hall Life and Legacy. Okay, on page 34, he says, on March 6, 1775, Prince Hall and 14 other free blacks were initiated in the Masonry through John Black, a representative of Irish Military Lodge number 441, okay? This was 1977, right? On the same page, this is the 1983 edition, the second edition of Charles Wesley's book, Prince Hall Life and Legacy, where he states, on March 6, 1778, Prince Hall and 14 other blacks were initiated in Masonry through John Batt, a representative of the Irish Military Lodge number 441, working under the authority of the Grand Lodge of Ireland. Okay, so we see that if they would have quoted, if they would have presented the entirety of Charles Wesley's work, they would see that in 1977, he was stating that in March 6, 1775, but in 1983, he put out his second edition and corrected the date. Now, why did Charles Wesley do this, right? Oh, I want to also talk about Peter Best, because they stated the fact, I want to go back to that document where they said here, they said, this document also lists Peter Best as one of the immortals initiated in the African Lodge on March 6, 1775 as deceased June the 20th, previous to this date, March 6, 1778, okay? But I want to show, you know, because like, again, I wanted to understand how did they miss these things on the actual records, okay? So what they're talking about on this document is Peter Best. And if you look at it, I'm going to blow it up because I want you to see these words. It says Peter Best made master June 20th, and you'll see this line going right here to 1778. Then it says deceased, and it's another line from the word deceased to this date right here, which is 1778, okay? So what they thought was the document was saying that Peter Betts had died June the 20th, 1778, and that's not what it's saying. It's saying that Peter Betts was made a master June the 20th, and if you see from the 20th here, it's right here going to a line there to 1778, okay? Now, to prove that what I'm saying is correct, I want to show the entirety of the column of that document so that we can all see what it looks like. And I'm going to blow this up too, because I want you to see the column and the format in which they listed these brothers, okay? So when you look at the, and at the top here, you will see masters, okay? And then it starts with Prince Hall, Grand Master, 1778, Thomas Sanderson, made master, 1778. Then Prince Taylor, made master. And if you see, they put the month and the day out here in a line going to 1778. Brinston Henson, May 30th, 1778. Cyrus Forbes, made master, June the 2nd, 1778. And then here's Peter Best again, made master, June 20th, here going 1778. And then they later asterisked it and then added deceased in 1778. So while they were looking at the document, or, you know, maybe reading out of the book, they made the mistake of believing that I was saying that he was died June the 20th, 1778, when Peter Betts was made a master. Now, what this document and what you're looking at, because they were stating that they were all made master masons at the same time. But as we look at this document, we can see that they were made master masons at different times in 1778. So this also raises a question for the traditional story. This is another part of their paper that they wrote, where they said they attempted to quote out of the book All Men Free and Brethren, and they wanted to quote Stephen Kantrowitz, where he said, some reasonable disputes exist as to whether this initiation actually occurred in March 1775 or in March 1778. A further possibility advanced is that Prince Hall, the leader of the black men, was initiated in March 1775, but the other 14 were not until March 1778. Now, what they do say is that a soldier named John Batt was the Masonic agent setting the initiations in motion at whatever date is not disputed. So they know that there was no Irish Military Lodge number 441. Here is their source This is a source that they're using. They are citing a work that's even questioning their own date and how it happened. Right there. And I was just surprised at that. So what I did was I contacted Stephen Kantrowitz. And this is just me. I'm just the type of person that does investigative research. And so when I see names and I talk to me, I want to go and talk to the person. So when I contacted him, I asked him about what he wrote, and this is what he said to me on September the 23rd. Okay. Dear Mr. Hairston, thanks very much for this. In my chapter, I followed what I understood at the time to be the conventionally accepted dates. Okay. So their own sources are now saying we were just trying to follow what was already in place. Okay. This is Stephen Kantrowitz. This is Cherno Sese, who wrote the first chapter in All Men Free and Brethren. This is what he stated to me. This is what he said. He said, it was my pleasure to talk to you. I want to emphasize my excitement at your work. I know that the issues you raise relative to the raising of African Lodge No. 1 are very controversial among Freemasons. Listen to what he said. I wrote the dissertation. I asked questions similar to yours concerning the date of 1775. Because I was not a Freemason, and because a long history of white Freemasons trying to discount the legitimacy of Prince Hall Freemasons, I thought there was enough evidence to rely on the 1775 date. Given that you are a Freemason, I think you occupy a special role in detailing the specific evidence surrounding the origins of Africa Lodge No. 1 and in discussing Africa Grand Lodge. So even the writers of All Men Free and Brethren, who they cited, had questions, but were really just following the conventional story. Now, I want to make sure that we understand, before I published my book, out of courtesy, I sent to the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and the Conference of Grand Masters for Prince Hall, I sent them my book so that they could read it and then tell me what they thought. And I asked that if they could produce a document that would show organization, operation, initiation in 1775, 1776, 1777, I won't write. I won't publish the book. Again, this is what Brother Leslie Lewis, who is a past Grand Master of the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, wrote to me on March 22nd, 2016, before I published the book. He said, dear Brother Hairston, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Most Worshipful Past Grand Master Leslie Lewis, jurisdiction of Massachusetts. I was asked by Grandmaster Reuben H. Meade to correspond with you. I was involved in contributing to the writing of All Men Free and Brethren, which they actually cited. I wrote the foreword for the book. I have read the information you have sent to Grandmaster Meade and found it to be quite interesting. There have always been some doubt in the back of my mind about John Batt, and you have opened my eyes and mine. Okay, so somebody in the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts was actually favorable to the work. Okay, now to show how I've approached my work, because a lot of people, because they wanted to characterize me as a hater of Prince Hall Freemasonry, but I was very careful in how I approached the release of Landmarks of Our Fathers. I wrote this to Grandmaster Reuben Meade on March the 13th, 2016. I said, after having received my copyright for the manuscript Landmarks of Our Fathers, I'm reaching out to editors for a read and a written review to be published in the book. This book, the book is regarding the start date of Prince Hall, March 6, 1775, as a traditional date for the initiation of Prince Hall and other 14 men. March 6, 1776 is the date given for the issuing of the permit for Africa Lodge, and July 3rd, 1776 as organization of the lodge. I have the records of Africa Lodge, and I have found that all of these dates to be in direct conflict with the records of Africa Lodge. The paper reveals that March 6, 1778 is the true date of initiation. I have the registry in March 6, 1778 minutes. Irish Military Lodge had nothing to do with anything regarding the start of Africa Lodge No. 1. It was an act done by John Batt and Prince Hall. I will show that John Batt put himself out to be a grandmaster and illegally initiated 15 brothers, and Prince Hall raised at least 6 of them himself. I said, out of respect and honor for the mother jurisdiction of Prince Hall Freemasonry, I would give you the opportunity to read the manuscript and see what will be published. So it shows that I was attempting, you know, to be very courteous and give these brothers an opportunity to read the manuscript and give me their opinion prior to my publishing. I received a phone call before I published, and I was told that they had no comment on the book whatsoever. But in 2018, they produced the white paper. Here's another portion of this particular paper where they stated, even those writers using the internet as their method of publication, as Mr. Hairston, were also aware of Sherman and Cole's work before Hairston self-published his landmarks. Charles H. Tupper, let's remember this name, wrote in his internet article, Prince Hall Masonry, many books have been written about the Black Lodges in North America over the years. Probably the most read is a documentary account of Prince Hall and other Black fraternal orders by Henry Coyle. This book is the first in a series that I will use arguments against regularity from in attempting to answer them. The objections are as follows. What they didn't really put in this as well is this fact here where it talks about, it says, it must be remembered that Masonic records for this period are fragmentary, and in many places, and the lack of positive documents to show the fact of the conferral is missing for a great many men who have claimed by our fraternity as true and trusty brothers. So what they're saying is, oh, well, you know, this documentation, we can't produce it because we're going to use this fact, you know what I mean, to say that these records could be missing. But here's an interesting thing couched in his statement, in Charles Tupper's statement, that they totally missed. It said, it is reasonably certain that John Batt did in fact sell degrees in 1778. Okay, so that's very important, you know, because even in here, Charles Tupper, their source, the person that they're using to say that the documents are fragmentary, so therefore there's no mention of these things. And even Ray T. Coleman saying that there is no official announcement of this event. As this particular evidence, we see couched in it that he said it is reasonably certain, their own source, saying it is reasonably certain that John Batt did in fact sell degrees in 1778. Continuing right here. Now, we know that they paid John Batt because here is the particular document that they mentioned themselves with the listing of 15 brothers. And right here is what they paid him. So right in their own source, they admit that their own source states the fact it is certain that John Batt sold degrees in 1778, and here we have an actual receipt of where those brothers paid John Batt. Now, again, in my book, I just present the facts and present my research. John Batt was the brother, not Irish Military Lodge number 441, who raised these 15 brothers. He initiated them, passed them, and some of them he raised. 6 of them were actually raised by Prince Hall himself. We have that documentation as well. And we know that they paid him because we see the payment right here. Okay? And their own source says that John Batt, because we know that he did not have the authority to initiate these brothers. We know this because there was no Irish Military Lodge at the date that's on the top of the registry, March 6, 1778. They had been gone. So therefore, it was Master Batt, and right on the top of this document, while they can argue that this digit right here is illegible, this definitely see Master Batt, who made these brothers right there, and a listing of those brothers and what they paid him. Now, the thing that I didn't understand was why they did not ever address this document, which says March 6, 1778, and lists John Batt as the Grand Master. Okay, they always went around and talked about the other document with the illegible number, but they never talked about this document. All right, now we have them talking about William H. Upton and Crowley's paper, where they attempt to use the 1768 rule of the Irish Grand Lodge and how military lodges or traveling lodges made Masons. Now, this is what they quoted. They said, in my opinion, Prince Hall would not have been treated by the Grand Lodge of Ireland as irregular or clandestine, right? The Grand Lodge of Ireland was far more likely to regard a new Mason as a brand plucked from the burning. In the second place, it is utterly opposed to Irish ideas of equity that the inoffensive should be punished for the fault of the lodge that initiated him. There is no suggestion of the candidate's exclusion from the rights and benefits of Freemasonry. It is always the offending lodge that is punished. This too is obvious on the face of the rule. The offending lodge is to be fined a guinea. Okay, so what they're doing here is they're saying that Prince Hall being initiated, and these brothers being initiated under the 1786 rule, they wouldn't be considered as irregular or clandestine, but the lodge would have been fined. The only problem is there's no proof that a lodge was involved. What I want to do is show that actual listing here. This comes straight out of the rules, orders, and regulations of November 1768. The very rules of Irish Grand Lodge, the Irish Grand Lodge that they were actually speaking. This rule can also be found in the Ame Raison, which was compiled by Lawrence Dermot from 1768. Here is what it reads. No army lodge for the future make any townsman a Mason. Okay? Now, I want us to be clear. There is a 1768 rule under the Irish Constitution that an army lodge could not make any townsman a Mason where there is a registered lodge held in any town where such lodge do meet. And any army or other lodge making a Mason contrary to this rule to be fined 1 guinea. Now, it amazes me, and it's ironic, because here we have a 1768 rule that says that an army lodge, a military lodge, could not make a Mason out of a townsman. But here we have a traditional story in which we're saying that Irish Military Lodge violated this rule and initiated 15 African-American men. Now, this is their source. This is the sources that they're using. The only thing I did was went and investigated their sources. And I'm showing you that, number one, it raises a question to say, first of all, we don't even have any records of Irish Military Lodge doing the initiation. So the rule in this case does not apply to these brothers because there was no Irish Military Lodge involved in the initiation. But even if it is, it's a violation. So what they were saying is, while at the same time we could say it's a violation, we would know that these brothers would not be looked at as irregular. Either way, we have a violation. The only problem is that they can't prove that Irish Military Lodge was even involved in that initiation for this rule to even apply to those brothers. Now, again, this is another part because I want to show how when this paper was compiled as a rebuttal to my work, how when they used their sources, how they used them, because I want to show you that there was politics involved here, okay? Out of the shadows, the emergence of Prince Hall Freemasonry in America over 225 years of endurance by Alton G. Roundtree and Paul Bessel, 2006, states Prince Hall Freemasonry is a predominantly Black Freemasonry. And he writes, this was Alton Roundtree in 2006. Okay, I want to make sure that we understand the date of this writing is 2006. It states initiation of Prince Hall and 14 other Blacks on March 6, 1775. So what they're saying is Alton Roundtree, who is definitely one of the premier writers in Prince Hall Freemasonry, he is also the editor of the Five Axis magazine, won numerous awards. They're saying this brother even agrees that March 6, 1775 is the date. They're using a 2006 work. The issue is, in 2017, Brother Roundtree wrote a paper concerning the date after my book was released. And here is where I'm asking him, because I said I still need to get a copy of your article that you wrote on the 1775 or 1778 date. You gave me permission to cite and republish it as a part of the appendix in my response to the white paper. Can you please send me a copy, and I'll be sure that you receive a copy of the response prior to publishing so that your citation meets your approval. Okay, this is me writing to Brother Al Roundtree, the brother that they're citing. So now He gave me the article. Here it is, March 6, 1778, origin date for Prince Hall Freemasonry by Alton Roundtree, fellow Phylaxis Society. Here's what he says. John Hairston brought to the forefront the question of whether Prince Hall and 14 other brothers were raised on March 6, 1775 or March 6, 1778. He says the minutes from Africa Lodge revealed that on March 6, 1778, Prince Hall and 14 other brothers were made Master Masons. The minutes further revealed the name and dates for those brothers. None were raised prior to March 6, 1778. The minutes of Africa Lodge was checked for a date earlier than March 6, 1778. Now, I want you to understand, this document, this actual was published in the second quarter of Phylaxis magazine in 2017. So they published their paper in 2018, which means this article was already in the Phylaxis magazine before they published the white paper. And they're using the 2006 work of Alton Roundtree, and here is his 2017 article where he's saying the minutes of Africa Lodge was checked for a date earlier than March 6, 1778, and none was found. Massachusetts newspapers were checked for any mention of Prince Hall or Africa Lodge between the period of March 6, 1775 and March 6, 1778. No information was found. He then continues to say, he closes the paper out with, March 6, 1778 is the documented date for the start of Prince Hall Freemasonry. This date should stand until information is found that documents an earlier date. What prevails, documentation or tradition? And the reason why I'm showing you this is I'm trying to, because we're examining the white paper and we're showing you politics and Masonic research. Here we have a special historical committee using sources and then showing earlier works where these persons accepted dates, but not showing the later works where they made the changes themselves to reflect the March 6, 1778 date. Politics, okay? Tony Pope, who is a renowned historian, wrote in the Square magazine, he stated the fact, Brother Hairston is to be commended for his diligence, intellectual honesty, and his courage in publishing his findings, but should not be surprised if he received brickbats among the bouquets. And then he says, a good read for history buffs, a fine example of potential researchers, and a must for anyone interested in the controversy likely to arise from it. Rebecca Hayes, who is the archivist for the Grand Lodge of Ireland Museum and Library, wrote this. Much confusion about its history, meaning Africa Lodge number 1, has been cleared up by in-depth analysis of primary and secondary sources. Our membership registers do not record the initiation of Prince Hall and 14 others in Lodge 441 and the 38th Regiment in 1775. John Hairston intelligibly explains why. Okay, this is from the Grand Lodge of Ireland's archivist. Here's some more work here that they put into the paper when they actually attempt to use Jeremy Belknap's statement. Now, I want you to read this very carefully because they're quoting Jeremy Belknap. And it says, when the 3 black men in February, look at this year right here, 1778, named Wooden, Cato, and Luck, a Mason, were decoyed into a sloop Ruby by its captain and placed in servitude, Prince Hall rallied the Masons to protest the outrage on February 27th. Now, what I want you to understand is they're saying that because the date has March 6, 1778, if they can show that they were Masons prior to that date, then it would prove that my position is wrong. So they said they used Dr. Jeremy Belknap's statement, when 3 black men in February 1778. So February 1778 predates March 6, 1778. So they had to be Masons before then, which then gives more support for the March 6, 1775 date. The problem is when you actually go and look at the document from Jeremy Belknap, here is what it really says. The prohibition of slave trade was effected in the following manner. In the month of February not 1778, but 1788, okay? 1788. So the document that they're attempting to quote, they put February 1778, when the actual document itself says in the month of February 1788. And that's on page 210 of his writing. So what we're seeing here is an attempt to create the narrative that 1775 is the true date, where there's even misquotes of the very sources that they're using, because I don't know if they think that researchers are not going to go and investigate the very sources that they're using, but I'm one of them that will. And I went to the very document that they were talking about and showed that they misquoted the date, and it was purposely because they believed that if they could do that and get away with it, that February 1778 predates March 6, 1778 and 1778. So therefore, they had to be Masons before then. Politics and Masonic research. And we know that the March 6, that the February 1788 date is the correct date. We know, not February 1778, because Prince Hall, in a letter that he wrote, right? This letter was dated May 23rd, 1788 by Prince Hall, which he talks about these brothers being kidnapped. Okay? This very event that Jeremy Belknap was talking about was in 1788, and it's confirmed by Prince Hall himself to a letter to the Deputy Grand Master Roland Hall. So that 1778 attempt right here and their quotation of Jeremy Belknap is false. And it's political why they did it, because they believed that predating my date would give theirs more validity. Okay? Now, they state here, the signature of Prince Hall. This is another part of the page, because I want you to see how disconnected their rebuttal was with the actual documentation. It says the signature of Prince Hall upon the petition of 8 blacks in the general court humbly demanding the abolishing of slavery on January 13, 1777. They said 4 signers heading the list, one of them, Lancaster Hill, Peter Best, Brinson Slern, and Prince Hall, were Masons and members of Africa Lodge number 1. So here they are saying that this document in 1777 proves that they were Masons before then, and then they named the brothers who were Masons in the document. Do you see the one I have circled, Lancaster Hill? I want to show you a document. This document, I want to blow it up because this is in Africa Lodge records as well. This is dated December the 29th, 1778. Okay, so this is after 1777. This name right here is Lancaster Hill, entered by Prince Hall. This is the time when Lancaster Hill was initiated into Africa Lodge by Prince Hall himself on December the 29th, 1778. So how can you say that the document from 1777 is the actual date, is the actual record that shows that these brothers were Mason before March 6, 1778, by saying that these brothers were Masons, when I can prove by documentation right out of Africa Lodge that Lancaster Hill was not a Mason until December the 29th, 1778, by a record handwritten right here, where Prince Hall himself entered Lancaster Hill into Africa Lodge in that date. Now, they continue. Hairston's manuscript presents internal inconsistencies. As an example, Hairston references and acknowledges Prince Hall approached Provincial Grand Master Joseph Warren in 1775. Now, I want to be clear. What I stated was, I was stating a scenario, because what I wanted to show was how illogical it would have been for Africa Lodge to approach Joseph Warren. So what they're saying is, the traditional story is that Joseph Warren was approached by Prince Hall to receive a charter, right? And that they did not receive a charter from Joseph Warren, who was the provincial Grand Master for St. Andrew's Grand Lodge at this time. And he died at Bunker Hill. So he was never able to give them a charter. But here's the thing. If, right, and they're saying that this was in 1775, if they were actually initiated by Irish Military Lodge in 1775, same year that he supposedly approached Joseph Warren, if this was true, why would they go to Joseph Warren Because remember, Irish Military Lodge did not leave Boston until 1776. So that means that Irish Military Lodge was still in Boston when he supposedly went to Joseph Warren and asked for a charter, who was under the Scottish Constitution, the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Now, if this Irish Military Lodge was still there and they were initiated there, why would they go to Joseph Warren, who was under the Grand Lodge of Scotland, rather than going to their own brothers to get a facsimile of the charter, which usually army or military lodges would do? They would give a facsimile of the charter and leave it with them and allow them to operate. Why would he go there? So what they did was they took my statement and scenario and believed that I agreed that Joseph Warren was approached in 1775. So I have to understand that they had to be Masons to be asking for a charter. That's not true. What I was doing was creating a scenario because I wanted to show how illogical it was, because Irish Military Lodge would have still been stationed in Boston in 1775. They did not leave until March 1775. Why would Prince Hall be going to Joseph Warren in 1775 to receive a warrant when they could have got the warrant from the Grand Lodge of Ireland or got it from Irish Military Lodge number 441? That made no sense to me. So they will claim that Prince Hall was a member of Irish Military Lodge in 1775, would remain so until they formed their own lodge in July 1776. Irish Military Lodge didn't leave Boston until March 6, 1776. If Irish Military Lodge number 441 was still in Boston in 1775 and didn't leave until 1776, why would Prince Hall approach Joseph Warren for a warrant? It was just didn't make any sense to me. So now they say the Archives of Africa Lodge would be non-existent for the years of, they're trying to explain why there's no records. In 1775, 1776, because Africa Lodge number 1 did not exist until founded and organized under dispensation into 1776. In 1775, Prince Hall and his 14 brethren were members of a traveling Irish Military Lodge. There exists documentary evidence that Irish Military 441 was in Boston from 1774 to March 17, 1776. However, there are no records, recordings, or documents of the lodge's activity in Boston during that time. Does that mean because there is no documentation available to us today, there was no activity? Here we go again with them attempting to state that there's no records for it. We have Alton Roundtree, who searched the records, myself, who searched the records. We found absolutely no records. Not only did Alton Roundtree actually review the records, he went and looked in the newspapers and saw absolutely no activity of these brothers. The Historical Committee asserts that there are no records for March 6, 1775 to July 3, 1776, because the lodge had not been founded, but failed to explain why there are no records for July 3, 1776 to March 6, 1778. So if you're saying the reason why there's no records for 1775 to June or July 3rd, 1776, then that's because they weren't founded as a lodge. Well, why are there no records from July the 3rd, 1776 to March 6, 1778 after they were founded? There's no records, period. And this has been stated by independent source, Alton Roundtree, who they cited as a source and a support, who said that he checked the records and found none. So I'm not the only one that found no records for the date after they was founded as a lodge. So then they say the writer assumes that John Batt left the area. This is just, all I'm doing is just showing portions of their paper and showing the politics and how they created the paper. It says the writer assumes that John Batt has left the area for fear of prosecution. Even though there is records of dissertation, there is no documentation that states authorities were actively searching for John Batt. That doesn't mean that he didn't desert. That doesn't mean that he didn't leave. I'm not trying to say that they were looking for him. I'm saying that he left. And that's just the fact. Irish Military Lodge 441 did have a valid warrant issued by the Grand Lodge of Ireland to operate as a lodge. Because of the lack of complete set of minutes, it is not known what officers or members were present during the initiation. Surely the Grand Lodge of England asked all of these questions before issuing a warrant to any group of petitioners. So they're saying that all of this would have been asked by the Grand Lodge of England before they issued the warrant. So what I did was I wrote to the Grand Lodge of England on March the 29th, 2016 by email. And here was the question that I asked. I am in search of any information on the investigation conducted by the Grand Lodge of England in the course of granting the warrant to constitute Africa Lodge number 459 in 1784. Is the report that investigation available? Okay, that was my question. Susan Snell, if you see here, she is the archivist and recorders manager for the Library and Museum of Freemasonry. This is what she wrote back to me in response to my inquiry. She says, my colleague Louise has investigated the minutes of the modern Grand Lodge for 1784, but find no mention of any discussion taking place regarding the warrant granted to Africa Lodge. Payments of 2 guineas for Hall Fund and 2 guineas for Charity Fund are recorded at the minutes of April the 4th, 1787, but no mention in 1784. She also states, I also checked the outgoing copy letter book for that period, but again, no mention of Africa Lodge is found for 1784 through 1785. Here's the problem. If you're saying that there was an investigation done, and this should verify the fact that they knew all of this information, they're saying there was no investigation. And the reason why is because Prince Hall enlisted William Moody as a liaison to the quarterly communication to be able to secure the charter. Prince Hall didn't go himself, and the brothers who met William Moody did not go into the quarterly communication. It was William Moody himself. So the Grand Lodge of Ireland granted the charter on the word and vouchment of William Moody. That's why there was no investigation, because they were already vouched for. So therefore, they received their charter without investigation, and that's the actual Susan Snell, who was actually stating the fact they found no investigation, no discussion regarding an investigation of Africa Lodge. Here, in addition, it was highly unlikely that the Grand Lodge of England would issue a charter to a clandestine body. And then I want you to read this, because this part right here, and then I'm going to be wrapping this up here. It says, especially when you consider that the existing lodge in Boston, Massachusetts, St. John's and St. Andrews, were operating without a charter or recognition from the Grand Lodge of England. I want to make sure that we understand this here. They stated that the Grand Lodge of England would not issue a charter to a clandestine group. And then they said that the existing lodges in Boston, and there was more than 2. There was more than that. When they received their charter, it was more than that. But the 2 that they named was St. John's and St. Andrews, and then they claimed that they were operating without a charter or recognition from the Grand Lodge of England. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, wow. So what I went and did was I showed right here, this is for the St. John's Lodge of Boston, the lodge that they say was operating without recognition or warrant. What you're looking at is the actual records, right, of when Henry Price was made and dispensated as a provincial Grand Lodge, right? And in here it says, Mr. Henry Price for us and in our place instead to constitute the brethren now residing or who shall hereafter reside in these parts into one or more regular lodges or lodges as he shall think fit and as often on occasion shall require. So in this, I want you to see the date of this writing is April 1733. And right after this, they constituted themselves under warrant by a bona fide provincial grandmaster under the Grand Lodge of England. St. John's Lodge was warranted under the Grand Lodge of England and had recognition under the Grand Lodge of England. And we know in Lane's Masonic records from 1717 to 1894, we see St. John's Lodge #1. Look at this here, Boston, Massachusetts. What's the date? 1733, July 30th, 1733, constituted August the 31st, 1733. How can you say that St. John's Lodge in Boston was operating without a warrant or recognition when they're sitting here on the very records of the United Grand Lodge of England? Okay. Now, and I'll tell you why they stated this in a minute, because this goes back to that 1791, and then we'll be. Now, this is St. Andrew's Lodge. This is the charter of the lodge, dated November the 30th, 1756. St. Andrew's Lodge of Boston was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1756. How were they not warranted and had no recognition? It's not. And here it is. The Grand Lodge of Scotland have constituted, erected, appointed, and hereby constitute, erect, and appoint worshipful brethren above name and their successors in all time coming, a true and regular lodge of free and accepted Masons. The reason why they stated that these particular lodges were operating without a warrant was because it would create the appearance that their warrant was the only one authentic. Okay, the Lodge of St. Andrews was actually in communications with St. John's Grand Lodge, though their relations was not favorable. In this 1766 quarterly communication of the St. John's Grand Lodge of Boston, we read Joseph Warren's name right here, and a committee of St. Andrew's Lodge. I just want to blow it up a little bit so we can see it. Messenger Samuel Barrett, Ezra Collins, William Palfrey, Sam Danforth, and Joseph Warren, a committee from St. Andrew's Lodge, so-called, was admitted into the Grand Lodge and presented their petition. Okay, so we know that they were even in communication with each other. All right. So what we have here in the examination of the white paper is, and I just want to stop sharing here for a second if I can. So what we have here in the examination of the white paper is where I took the entire rebuttal, section by section, and I wanted to show that, because if you're going to rebut my book, you have to read it. If you're going to rebut my work, you have to make sure that the sources that you utilize actually support your contention. You have to make sure that the sources that you're using to rebut me actually support what you're saying. As you can see from their own paper and an examination of the very sources that they are using, you understand? The very sources are totally contradictory and do not support their position for a March 6, 1775 date, and even gives more credibility to March 6, 1778. Thank you.
I just cannot comment. I'll just read whatever you've been ranked right now in the public chat. Mike Tyson Mason. Wow.
I couldn't help myself. I was provoked.
I was
provoked.
Okay, just to get back to Saperiao, the format, I mean, it was a bit long, I should admit that, but I did not kind of interrupt Brother John, because the logic that has been developed needed to end and get to the end, and it would be great not only for us, for participants to listen and then ask, because whole picture of your arguments already have been presented here. I mean, there might be some more, of course, if we go into details, but kind of you made this general picture quite clear to us, and not only for us participants here, but for the viewers in future of this video on YouTube, they will have the starting point and the ending point. So I did not interrupt for that purpose, and I ask for apologies and for bearing with us today for the long lecture. I'm asking the participants who stayed faithfully and listened to every bit of the information you provided today. The same thing happened the last time in the first lecture as well. So thank you so much, Brother John. I mean, I wouldn't dare to mess with you with the logic. If I had to prove something, I would get prepared myself a bit better. So okay, thank you so much. And without taking much more of the time, Brother Mo, floor is yours.
Yes, good evening, good morning, Good afternoon, everybody, world, ladies and brethren. White Worshipper Moses Gomez, Atlas Pythagoras Lodge, number 10, Westfield, New Jersey. Also the current Grand Historian of the Grand Lodge of New Jersey. Brother John, once again, your research is phenomenal. It's impeccable. But I was curious this morning as I was getting ready, prepared to listen to the show, I saw something on YouTube concerning the 10 most protected people on Earth. And I really thought, I said, they should make 11. If they do make 11, you would be the 11th person. Because I believe there's going to be a target on your back. I said, you must become the 11th. But
thank you, brother.
They're going to be some bricks flying over.
And by saying that, I become number 12. So who knows? But again,
yeah, you got to be careful.
Oh, I know.
Oh, God.
First of all, it wasn't bad enough that they had to contradict the book. That wasn't good enough. They found no avenues. Now they got to contradict your hater that you just don't like Prince Hall, that you just don't,
wow.
They're just trying to find a way to circumvent the proof which is in their hands. Now I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I, from experience, dealing with many lodges around the world, that tend to say they're older or have done this and done that, but we lost the minutes. If by chance, I understand that they why would they go to Warren? They could have went to Regiment Lodge number 441, which is in existence. Those minutes or those, they're claiming that at that moment, history or minutes are gone or documentation's gone. But can it be true though? I mean, in the lieu of, it seems like they're trying to say, which happens a lot, that in lieu of original documentation, this is what happened. And we know this is what happened, but we don't have the proof, but this is what happened. And there's been many cases with lodges in Pennsylvania, the Mother Grand Lodge in the world in Scotland, Mother Kilwinning, who goes back to 1140, but we don't have the minutes. So we know at one time we did, we saw it, but we don't have it now. But, so can it be possible without reason of doubt or shadow of doubt that maybe perhaps something could have happened? They could have went to Warren and maybe turned down, or maybe it just didn't work out, or maybe those documents are no longer in play. And again, I'm not ridiculing you. I'm not going against. I believe every word you say. I'm behind you 100%. But I'm just playing that devil. And I mean, I guess they're saying in the absence of documentation, this is what actually happened. But could there have been the opportunity of having what their statement's saying true, and maybe we just don't have the documentation available?
Oh, I get it. Yes, situations like that can happen. But here's the thing. We're talking about a very vibrant and active society of Freemasons within Boston, okay? And we're talking about St. Andrew's Lodge, St. John's Lodge, other lodges that were constituted by the Grand Lodge of England, right? So we're not just talking about the records of Africa Lodge, because I'm also in possession, thanks to Brother Oscar Allen, who opened the door for me to actually get the records of St. Andrew's Lodge. Okay, so if Joseph Warren is a part of St. Andrew's Lodge, their records should record that, and it doesn't. So what I'm saying is that when there's no documentation whatsoever, the only thing that we can do to be able to accept the premise that there was an approach to Joseph Warren at the same time when Irish Military Lodge was still stationed in Boston, we have to use logic at that point, because you have no records. So now you're telling me to rely on my logic, right? And this is one of my arts. So, you know what I mean? I'm going to take it through the logical conclusion. So my question is, why would Prince Hall approach a whole nother constitution and Joseph Warren when his lodge that he allegedly was initiated in is still sitting in Boston? Why didn't they go to them? Why didn't they go to the Grand Lodge of Ireland via the aegis of Irish Military Lodge number 441? And this is the thing that's not answered. And I do want you to understand, in Landmarks of Our Fathers, I addressed this, right? Because the writers where they got that information from were out of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And I spoke with them, one of them directly. Okay, so I have those communications as well, where I went and asked, where did you get your information from? Because we don't see it in the, you know, the records of the Lodge of St. Andrew. How did you come to this conclusion? You understand what I'm saying? That's talked about in Landmarks of Our Fathers. You know, so yes, while there's no documentation, we have to utilize logic at that point. And that's the only thing that I could do. What's the question? You know,
I understand. I mean, I totally understand how that can be. And what always bothered me was, you know, there are lodges, American lodges here now, with American men here that were fighting against England, fighting against the British Empire. Why would these men decide to jump ship and try to ask an Irish military lodge when their compatriots are here and they're all fighting for the cause, for the possibility that all men will be created equal, that we'd be living in a new nation with different rules and a different society, which hasn't happened. But why would you jump ship and go to the enemy and say, give me a charter and hurry up because I'm gonna shoot you in a little bit? I mean, it's just amazing. I can never understand why they would cross that line and jump ship, and instead of asking their own compatriots here or American revolutionists here that were with them in that society for years on here, and then have to jump ship and go to an Irish military lodge, which at the time was part of the, you know, dominion of British Empire. And I'm like, why would you go to the enemy instead of who's going to fight against you to give you the same charter?
exactly.
But thank you, my brother, once again. Well done.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, brother, all the time.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Brother Mo. Before giving floor to Shri, there is one question, Brother John. You mentioned that, not mentioned, but you lectured actually and made some point there. And I was just wondering, New York in 1824, if I'm not wrong, asked them as Grand Lodge to issue the charter, right? And you made the point that why would they have asked just a regular lodge if they were not, I mean, for the charter, and who they were writing in 1824 if they were not the Grand Lodge? Because you brought up the document which says that in 1824 they decided to declare the independence, and it went on and on. So the idea, why would New York be asking them in 1824 for a charter as Grand Lodge if they're not yet Grand Lodge, and they just decided in response to them, one of the motivations, to become a Grand Lodge?
Understood. Okay, I just want to clarify two dates. 1824 was when Africa Lodge petitioned the Grand Lodge of England for a renewal of their charter to be able to confer degrees linear to the first three. So they wanted to do all seven. There was a certain quasi-rite called the 7 steps, which included the Royal Ark. So they were already Royal Ark Masons in 1824 when they wrote to the Grand Lodge of England and asked for a renewal of the charter that they were already under from 1784, okay? But 1826, they were approached by Boyer Lodge, right? Boyer Lodge approaches them in 1826 and asked them for a charter. What happened was they gave them, just like they did Philadelphia, they gave them a facsimile of the charter. New York saw the charter, was like, nah, we're not accepting this. Number one, you're not a Grand Lodge. Show us that you're a Grand Lodge. So in 1827, this is when the Africa Lodge declared itself in the June 18th minutes. I showed those minutes. In June 18th, 1827, they declared themselves, and I want you to understand that they said, declared ourselves free from the government of our mother Grand Lodge, okay? Yeah, so this is in 1827. But New York approached them and refused the charter initially because it says that they charged them $200 and they wanted the charter, but because they wasn't a Grand Lodge, they wouldn't accept the charter. So they said, we want an independent charter. So Africa Lodge in Boston, Massachusetts reorganized themselves as a Grand Lodge, wrote an independent charter for New York, and then wrote a grand charter for themselves, which I also showed as well. You know what I mean? So prior to June 18th, 1827, there is absolutely no evidence that shows there was a Grand Lodge at that point.
I fully follow that. It was 24. I missed the date. 26. I was that was what I meant. So why would New York ask them to issue the charter if they were not Grand Lodge? Why would the New York issue a kind of petition to someone who they then say that, oh, you're not Grand Lodge?
I understand. Right. So what happened was because they had already chartered Philadelphia. Okay. They gave
Lodge
Philadelphia.
Number 1.
Excuse me?
As Lodge number 1.
No. Africa Lodge number 459. After they received their charter, they were Africa Lodge number 459 under the Constitution of the Grand Lodge of England. Then Philadelphia, a group of Philadelphia Masons came to them. Now, Philadelphia, in a letter that they wrote to Prince Hall, stated that they went to Virginia first, and that the Masons in Virginia told them, we're not giving you a charter for fear of the fact that the slaves will want to be Masons too. So the only other place that they knew to go was Two Brothers, because they heard that there was a lodge of African-American brothers in Boston. So in 1797, they approached them and they received a facsimile of that particular charter for Africa Lodge number 459. New York hearing, oh, them brothers out there giving out charters, let's go out there. Right? But when they got there, they saw just a regular lodge. Because now let us remember, New York was also a very vibrant Masonic community as well. Very intriguing history in New York. You understand? So Boyer Lodge was already a lodge when they approached them. This is what's stated in their minutes. Boyer Lodge. They were already a lodge. So they were already quite, understanding of what they were looking for, but they heard that brothers was chartering brothers out of Boston.
So they thought it was a Grand Lodge, and they just approached them, and they found out that it was just a regular lodge, as they are, and so they said no. Okay, got. Now it's clear.
Excuse me.
Brother
I would like to append something also to what Brother John Hairston is saying, because I think what hasn't been addressed in the conversation is the condition of African Americans during that time, and in some instances may have justified the actions of African lodges in the way they were chartering lodges in Philadelphia and other places. It could be possible that they weren't given the opportunity, given that they were free Black men, such as the instances with the Grand Lodge in New York and the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and other jurisdictions. So although their practices may, in some instances, may be considered irregular or unlawful under Masonic law, given the conditions of African Americans during that time, I think they really had no choice but to exert their independence. After being dropped from the rolls. But we do know that they were, in having received the charter from England, regardless to what their origins were, and we know and accept in modern times that sometimes jurisdictions that are formed clandestinely may receive regularity from acceptance from the craft and coming into the fold in certain instances, such as healing and things of that nature. So I think that, from that, in respect to that African lodges exerting their independence after their charter was revoked with the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England kind of does have some validity. So I think that, that at that point is kind of irrelevant, because that no one was going to issue them a charter after their charter was revoked from the not nowhere in the United States for that matter. That may have also been why they appealed to the United Grand Lodge of England, or the Premier Grand Lodge of England, for a charter to begin with. Maybe, John and I had spoken about this. Maybe they discovered that what John Badhead did was unlawful and that they had been duped. And so in order to become regular, they sought a legitimate charter.
Let me add on to that, because yes, this is very important. This is why I said in my past lecture that I did on Friday, I said that history has to be, especially Masonic history amongst African American Masons, has to be researched under the context of the social climate, right? So the thing that we have to understand is that, yes, because if you look at it, right, why would John Roe provide them a permit in which they could not make Masons? Because this is the bloodline of any lodge, you understand, is to make Masons. So it tells us something about the climate when they're receiving a permit to walk in procession, bury their dead, assemble, but they can't make Masons. You understand what I'm saying? And then when we look at and then one thing I wanted to clarify, in 1824, they did not know that their charter was revoked. You understand what I'm saying? They had no idea. Most of the lodges in America, some of them didn't even care because they were already operating independently of Grand Lodge of England anyway, so they didn't care. You understand? But we're talking about others were just not knowledgeable of what had happened in England with the union of the Antient and Modern Grand Lodge. They were not aware. You understand?
Yeah.
So they were saying, hey, we just writing you and let you know. Hold on, brother.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Right. So when they're looking at it, Africa Lodge, when we're reading their writings, right, from that particular period of time from 1813, they were not knowledgeable of the fact that they had been erased by the Roes. They believed that their charter was still active. And it wasn't until New York came and was like, hey, you know, y'all not a Grand Lodge, y'all not doing this. We need y'all to do this in order for us to be satisfied with this charter. You know, you got to do this. This is when they declared themselves to be free from them, not because they believed that their charter was revoked, but because they believed, hey, man, we're going to do our own thing as a Grand Lodge here. You know, and you got to imagine what $200 then in today's currency was for a charter. You understand what I'm saying?
It was a huge one.
Yes. Yes.
Very good motivation. Okay. I'll read Brother David Weddington's remark, which seems very interesting and for the recording purposes. And then floor is yours. Thank you, Brother John, for some great research. Politics is present in every sphere of human existence. Please forgive me, give my well-intentioned levity. In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. That was Franklin Roosevelt's words.
I agree. It was planned that way.
Thank you. Brother Free, floor is yours.
Thank you. It was non-stop. I find it difficult for anyone to be able to refute the body of evidence which you have placed before us, and indeed in your book Before the World. A couple of, I'm nitpicking here, and much like Brother Gomez, I'm going to try and play devil's advocate for a little while, just to make things more interesting.
Sure.
One was a particular extract which you showed us. It referred to, I think it was from the year, from 92, where you mentioned there were 4 brethren from Providence, who, if you recall that. Now, one is, I think I've requested actually for the entire set of papers, but that particular one really interests me because the first entry in that list is for a Anthony Battles or Bartles, I don't know how to pronounce that, of Bengal. And that's very interesting because I'm a UGA Mason in India. My mother lodge is in Bombay, but I'm also a joining member of lodge number 67 in Calcutta, which is in the district of Bengal. And it is the oldest lodge outside of the British Isles, outside a UGLE lodge outside, surviving UGLE lodge outside the British Isles. And my bone of contention over here is that perhaps when you read out those 4 names of William Power of Providence, Fortran Truston of Ditto, George Hall Ditto, and Prince Wright Ditto, I think it could possibly refer to them having been raised or at least towns, and they're coming in as joining members. Now that has to be true, even if it's not for these 4 from Providence. Maybe they were actually being initiated and they lived in Providence. but it can't possibly, that logic can't possibly apply to Brother Anthony Bartels, who is listed as being of Bengal, because Bengal is halfway around the world from Boston. I know I've lived in both places. So,
right. Those four brothers were actually members of the. They were members of Africa Lodge, but they lived in Providence. You understand what I'm saying? When we researched the names, because like I said before, I have been doing research striving to find Hiram Lodge number 3, which is this third constituent lodge of this alleged Grand Lodge from either 1791 or 1808. And I've also been trying to find it because, you know, it should be able to give validity to that. There's none. So when we went to go research these brothers, we knew that they lived in Providence, but they were traveling, because if you understand the African American communities in the New England states, they were traveling in dealing with each other from New York to Philadelphia to Providence to Boston. You know, these were places where brothers were coming and meeting and actually seeing each other. And so these brothers, because there was no other place to receive the degrees, they would travel to where these lodges were, be initiated, then go back to where they were, and then set up, you know, they would set up lodges. The only issue is we don't find a Hiram Lodge number 3. And I thought it was very important to show that, was because if in 1791, saying that a lodge in Providence, Rhode Island was a part of a constitution of a Grand Lodge, then those brothers could have been initiated in that lodge in Providence without having to drive, or I mean, not drive, but come all the way to Boston.
No, Brother John, sorry to interrupt you. I'm so sorry to interject, but I follow that logic. I'm just giving you a counterpoint, a theory which perhaps.
Oh, I understand that, but that's not in this case. That's all.
Because,
that's all I'm saying.
If I may, I'm not being able to wrap my head around why Anthony Bartels is being listed of being of Bengal. And the only thing I can think of is that he's a joining member. He is either being initiated or passed or raised, or all three, in Bengal. And now he's come as a joining member and joined the lodge in Boston, because otherwise the logic of the, you know, of being a traveler, of being coming across to, sorry, not on freeway talk, but coming across to Boston.
We lost your last sentence, I guess.
No, so all I'm saying is that this logic does not apply to the first entry, and therefore this logic, then we need to step back and see whether it applies to all entries. That was point one. And I hear you. I mean, it could well be that these four brothers did actually live in Providence. There was no lodge in Providence, and they did. But it could also be that they lived in Providence, they were initiated in 1791, and then they came as joining members in 1792 to Boston.
Right.
Or whatever. Maybe they had a falling out with the brethren in that lodge.
They were entered. So when we see the word entered, it means they were initiated. That's the reading.
Well, I'm not, unless you have some higher knowledge on the phraseology in Boston at the time, because that does not explain why Anthony Bartels of Bengal is being entered into the lodge.
Okay, entered means initiated. So this brother that you're very focused on could have been entered into the lodge as an entered apprentice, right? That's why entered. And I showed a document from December the 29th, 1779, where Lancaster Hill was entered into the lodge by Prince Hall. This means initiated, okay? And so we know this because this is on a number of documents. We understand what it means. So the phraseology is clear. When we did the research on the brothers, when I saw Providence, I focused on them because I wanted to put the piece together for Hiram Lodge number 3. When we researched them, they weren't living in Boston. They were living in Providence. And they traveled to Boston to be entered apprentices or initiated into that particular lodge. My logic at that point was, why would they have to come to Boston to be initiated into a lodge if the lodge that was in Providence, allegedly, was already chartered by Africa Lodge number 459 in Boston. Why would they have to travel there to be initiated as entered apprentice? And
well,
so,
I don't want to be contrarian, but it could also be because they didn't get along with the people who were in charge of that lodge.
oh,
But
that's
still,
possible.
Well, under Masonic
But
law,
whoever's making these points, you have to prove it.
I accept your
Okay.
point, but I still don't think that it explains why this particular brother of Bengal is being listed as having been entered.
Okay.
but
Well,
Masonic law
this
supports
situation
that because
is
under Masonic law, a Mason is supposed to be a member of the closest lodge to his residence. And this has been long established Masonic law that dates back to this time. So it would be it would be unlawful for another jurisdiction to initiate a Mason in a jurisdiction that he doesn't reside in. So the jurisdiction would not have been it would be a contradiction to Masonic law, essentially.
On the
Okay,
other
but
hand, I will support Shri and say that there was no jurisdiction at all that was being violated.
Anyway,
Because
let's
there
not
was no
belabor the
lodge
point.
in
Let's not
Providence.
belabor the point because I don't think we'll find an answer to it. But
No,
even
no,
if I
just
even if I were to accept your interpretation of that, Brother John, and I have no reason not to accept that that first entry is very, very troubling. And since it's a district that I know, Bengal, I would be very curious. In fact, what I'm going to do is once we are out of lockdown and
Shri.
with Brother John, but after lockdown, I'm going to actually research the records of my joining lodge, which is in Calcutta, to see if there is a record of an Anthony Bartels over there, because why is he being listed as being of Bengal? That was one. The other one was more to understand, well, it's sort of supporting what you have said, but just to understand. Now, Brother John, I'm a big fan of Lane's Masonic records. And the reason is because my mother lodge, I've looked at Lane's Masonic records for my mother lodge, which dates back to 1848. And this other Calcutta lodge where I'm a joint member, which I told you about in Bengal, which dates back to 1740. And they're absolutely spot on, they're absolutely accurate. So much so that also in respect of one of the lodges you mentioned, which is St. John's Lodge number 1 in Boston, when I was living in Boston, I attended an open house. So I know that lodge well. I know I met with a lot of the brethren there. I read the history of that lodge because I was planning to join that lodge. And again, Lane's Masonic records is absolutely spot on the places they met, when it was constituted, etc. So I'm inclined to also look at at Lane's Masonic records for African lodge and think that they're accurate, right? Because I mean, they're just sort of the Bible, as it were, of Masonic records of English lodges. Now over there, it says that Lane's, and I looked it up after your last talk. I looked up African lodges details in Lane's Masonic records, and it says that it was warranted in 1784. On 29th of September.
And then their number changed to 370. I know what you
Oh,
mean.
that's fine, because even my lodges, both my lodges, numbers changed because there was a rewriting of the rolls, because the UGLE rolls have been rewritten a number of times. Now it doesn't happen anymore. They just leave it blank. But earlier what would happen is that every few years they would do a rewrite, and the lodges which were erased would be removed, and everyone else would get a promotion of sorts, right? So they were in 29th of September 1784 is when African Lodge was warranted as number 459 in I think 1792. Ones which I wanted to get some further understanding from you is that the last payment according to Lane's Masonic records, so the last annual returns were filed in 1797.
1798.
According to Lane's Masonic records that I have, it says 1797 actually.
The letter states the fact it's 1798.
Sorry?
If you read the letter from the United Grand Lodge of England that I showed from 1960.
You cited a letter, but I'm on actual Lane's Masonic records. So if you go to
I'm showing a record from the United Grand Lodge of England from their Grand Secretary. You understand what I'm saying? Okay, so they searched their records And Lane's Masonic records is a compilation of records. That's great. What I'm saying is I'm showing a record that says the last communication that they received, and then we even have a letter from Prince Hall himself who said, we sent you a sum of money that you obviously didn't receive. This was in 1798. You understand what I'm saying? So if it's saying that their last payment is 1797, that's great. But we know that the last communication that they had with the United Grand Lodge of England was in 1798 because it was a letter from Prince Hall. You understand?
Right.
Then this 1960 letter from their Grand Secretary to this brother to New York also states the fact that the last communication that they had and the last payments that they had was 1798.
Right. But all I'm saying is that there's a discrepancy there. The Lane's Masonic records actually state that the last payment received was 1797. Now, it doesn't really matter whether it was 1797 or 1798. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm just quoting what Lane's Masonic records say. And it's different from what the Grand Secretary wrote back in 1960.
That's not what he wrote.
And that's fine. That could be just a...
No, hold on. Let me address that. The last payment could have been 1797, but the last communication was in 1798. That's
No,
what the...
I'm not on the communication. I'm making another point here. I agree with that. That's fine. I'm saying the last payment was made in 1797, which means that's when the last annual returns would have been sent to London from Boston, right? And it took a good 16 years before UGLE in London, or Grand Lodge at the time, decided to erase African Lodge from its rolls in 1813. Yeah. So between 1797 and 1813, there's been no payments being made, and it takes such a long time for African Lodge to be erased. So I'm trying to understand, one, is that, do you have any idea, I mean, because you have researched the period and also the geography, why it would have taken so long for any Grand Lodge to actually say, you know what, you guys are not paying your dues, we are not going to keep you on our rolls anymore? That's one. And the second point about, you know, when you talked about the whole New York, I think Brother David brought up that New York incident where they asked for another charter from Grand Lodge. And the theory could have been that they were trying to heal themselves, or maybe they just lost their charter, whatever it may be. But surely they themselves must have known that they haven't been filing returns or making payments for the last 10, 15 years, whatever that exact number is. Why would they have approached Grand Lodge in London for a charter or for a warrant?
Okay, let's address the first point. The first point is, you have to understand there was no internet back then. There was no cars, no planes. Things had to go by boat. In fact, by the same records that you're reading, Africa Lodge was actually chartered in September of 1784, but they did not actually receive the charter in their own hands until 1787.
No, that is absolutely true, because I know my mother lodge and my joining lodge the same thing. The date of charter warrant is different from the date when it's received, because it's to come by boat, by steamer.
Right. Okay. So again, we see where the travel of things and the communication can take some time. Okay. So therefore, we have to keep the history in its social context of the time period. Okay. So, you know, chartered 1784, this could be the date we have it, now we doing this. No, it took 3 years to get the charter in their actual hands, okay, from London. 3 years. They were without a charter, but was a chartered lodge, okay? So now, when we're talking about that, and you're saying that why would they go if they should have known, if you also read the letter, and I'll send it to you so you can read it more closely, it says, we were not able to have regular communications. Okay, that was in the letter. We were not able to have regular communications. And so therefore, we're writing to you, not because they want a charter, renewed charter to be Master Masons. They were trying to get a renewed charter because they were under the impression that they could work the Royal Ark in other degrees under a Grand Lodge warrant. You understand? So their actual 1824 letter was for them to be able to confer other degrees besides the first three. That was the whole context of the letter. This is why when they opened the letter, they said, "We, your humble petitioners, who have been raised to the sublime degree of Royal Art Masons." They introduced themselves as Royal Art Masons because they were trying to get a renewal of the charter in which they could act. Because the charter that they had from 1784, they were only able to confer the first three degrees. We have an idea of how they received the Mark degree because I have records that shows that they had a Mark Lodge in 1816 under Africa Lodge called the African Lodge of Mark and Masons and Past Masters. You understand? Handwritten records. So what they were doing was writing to receive a charter by which they could confer the other degrees. So that's why they approached them. And again, they believed that their charter was still active.
Even though they've made no returns, no payments, all of that, they still, that's a little, yes. I don't know why they were under the impression that there was.
I don't know, but that's just what it is. You know, we can speculate, question it, whatever, but we know from a fact that, you know, they thought that their charter was still active because they were operating. They just were not holding regular communications. You understand what I'm saying? That's why he said after Prince Hall died, we were not able to hold regular communications. And so therefore, you know, at this particular time, and some, you know, when you look at them acquiring the degree of Royal Ark, they were very active. You understand? And so therefore they were like, hey, we want to renew our charter to receive the ability to confer these other degrees, because they were under the impression that the Grand Lodge was the one who chartered those. And the problem was that the Grand Lodge of England Modern did not even recognize the Royal Ark degree until 1813. Okay, so them writing them, and I can understand why the Grand Lodge of England probably looked at that letter and said, what? You want us to give y'all the permission to confer a degree we don't even recognize? You understand what I'm saying? So, you know, you can understand that. So you do have to understand that while we have to be honest, there was a small degree of misinformation that they probably had. You understand what I'm saying? And you can't believe that everything had to be perfect, right? Yeah. So those imperfections was, oh, we don't know that our charter is been removed from the rolls. We're still active. We're Africa Lodge. We got a bona fide charter here. And they were very proud of their charter. And so they're saying to themselves, oh, we got these other degrees too, and we want to confer those. Let's go ask our Grand Lodge, can we do this? And you could see that they were not knowledgeable that the degree that they were holding wasn't even recognized by their Grand Lodge.
Yeah, I think it's clear that there was obviously lesser oversight in New England than, for example, in India, because the British had left by then, I suppose, and that link had been severed to an extent.
Where were they receiving those degrees?
Sorry?
Where were they receiving those degrees?
You're talking about the Royal Ark degree?
Yes.
Just let's moderate, because we do have other participants waiting for the row. So, Brother Salem, could you wait? Sure. If you're done with the questions, let's give floor to others.
Yeah, I think I've taken too much time in
because
it
may. Yeah, Brother Mo, floor is yours.
Thank you, my brother. John, I understand the concept. I guess people forget that we were living in this type of era in this world, and things were much, much slower then. Just imagine that the War of 1812 between America and Great Britain ended officially with the Treaty of Ghent, December 24th, 1814, but yet the Battle of New Orleans took place 2 weeks after the signing of the treaty, because of course they just couldn't pick up the phone and say, hey, troops, get off the field, it's over. So things do take time. And in that time, things could come up and errors could happen. But if Boyer Lodge was a lodge and they wanted to seek recognition from or get a charter from African Lodge, well, who chartered Boyer and how did Boyer start? And if they kind of started the same way, why would they feel this indifference where if 459 wasn't Grand Lodge, we don't accept you, you know, you're just like us, we're nothing, so why bother?
Right. Boya is a very interesting entity to study when it comes to Africa Lodge, because while many will state that Boya Lodge was chartered by Africa Lodge, I say that Boya was already a lodge when they approached them. This is seen from the minutes from 1826. The other thing is that when you continue on in the records, up to 1827, from 1826 to 1827, you see this argument between Boya Lodge and Africa Lodge, at that time now is now African Grand Lodge. And so with that being stated, I found this listing of items in a 1836 inventory list, okay? And it's in Africa Lodge records. It's dated 1836. Listed among these items is the charter for Boya Lodge. It was so ironic because I was like, did they ever receive the charter at all? You know what I mean? Because you have to imagine $200 is a lot of money, right? For a charter. And so it was kind of ironic that in 1836, and we're talking about 1826 to 1827, they're arguing about this charter. And they're arguing about the authority of Africa Lodge, who was then in 1827, Africa Grand Lodge, to even issue this particular document. And then in an 1836 itemized inventory list, we find the warrant of Boya Lodge.
So they didn't actually give them it.
That's what I'm saying.
They got money, $200 back then, and never paid. I mean, never sent.
So when someone asks me about Boya Lodge, you know what I mean? I'm always intrigued by the research that I've done, because they are one very active group of people in Boya Lodge, and they have such an interesting history, man. And New York has an interesting history as far as African American Freemasonry. You know what I mean? So when you ask me that question, I'm always taking this. And then in 1845, and I want you to listen to what I'm saying, the Grand Lodge of New York questioned, and I think it was on multiple occasions when the Grand Lodge of New York questioned the authenticity of Boya Lodge. Boya Lodge told them to contact the African Grand Lodge to verify that they were legitimate. At this time, the Grand Master of Africa Grand Lodge in Boston was John T. Hilton, who told the Grand Secretary of Massachusetts, who was coming to him on behalf of the Grand Lodge of New York, and said, we don't mess with them. That's what he told the Grand Secretary of Massachusetts. We don't mess with them. And so, this whole history between Boya Lodge and Africa Grand Lodge in Boston, and then when you get to the institution of the National Grand Lodge in 1847, and how the United Grand Lodge responded to a most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts ran National Grand Lodge, how they responded to them by all this confusion until they just decided, hey man, we ain't taking no part in that. All of that goes all the way back to 1826. And that's what I was telling brothers. When you read the records, it will show you this vibrant dialogue between, Boston and New York. So, that's a very interesting piece of history right there.
Okay, Brother Mo, any follow-up? Otherwise, I'll move on. We got your picture stuck. I guess the communication problem. So I'll read the question from YouTube channel. They've been waiting for a long while.
I
So,
understand that.
Brother Mo, your connection, your line is very bad.
And of course,
I'll have to mute you, and you can try to ask your question a bit later when the connection is better. So the question comes from YouTube channel. We had significant up to 30 viewers today. The question comes, what was the response of the United Grand Lodge of England to the request in 1827 by Africa Lodge 459 for the renewal of its charter, given that they had erased that lodge years before? That's
First of
interesting.
all, it was 1824, not 1827, and there was no response.
No response from you, Jilly.
There was no response on record to that letter.
All right, got it. Answers taken. And Brother Eden, floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Brother John, again, thank you for a wonderful, well-researched work. I had two questions for you. One is, I think you and I talked offline about the Harem Lodge number 3, because in my initial work, research, it seems like a lodge that helped with the formation of the Grand Lodge of Liberia, but I haven't been able to find any detailed information about it. And I'm in the process of contacting the Grand Lodge of Rhode Island to get some information. Hopefully I can get some information that will be useful. But also the Grand Lodge of Liberia, I'm still trying to research the information. Unfortunately, I'm at a disadvantage as all our records were destroyed during the civil crisis. But there's some documentation that say that Liberia approached the Grand Lodge of England when the Grand Lodge when Africa 449 lost their charter. And that's when we established our direct communication with the Grand Lodge of England. Is there a way I can, you can send me this information offline if possible. Is there a way I can get information on how to get the records of African Lodge to do my own research and review like you have?
Yes. I mean, everybody pretty much has these records, and they can be retrieved from the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. Not the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, because they turned those records over, and I think it was either 1949, 1950, when they turned all of those records over for preservation purposes to the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And you could contact them and their librarian and just probably let them know that you would like a copy of them, in digitized form, and they'll probably send them to you. The actual records of Africa Lodge, yes.
Okay, thank you. And then also, anything more on Harem 3? I know you said that you don't think it exists, but there's nothing on Harem?
Nothing. Okay, so here's my thing. As we can see, right, in 1792, that there were brothers from Providence, Rhode Island, that were actually being initiated through Boston, right? So we know that there were actual Masons in Providence, Rhode Island, right? The thing is the trouble finding anything on Hiram Lodge number 3. Because according to the initial traditional story, this lodge would have had to exist in 1791, because they're saying that Prince Hall was allegedly made a provincial grandmaster and was creating this Grand Lodge of 1791 out of these 3 lodges, Hiram Lodge being one of them out of Providence. So if we're talking about a Hiram Lodge in Providence, Rhode Island, it would have had to exist in 1791. The only problem is we find none of that in the records of Africa Lodge, none of it. Up until 1826, we do not see Providence, Rhode Island mentioned in the records until 1826. And then when you read the letter, right, that was written from Providence, Rhode Island to Africa Lodge in Boston, Lodge of Boston, they called themselves Harmony Lodge number 1. Okay, and that's what they designated themselves as, Harmony Lodge number 1. Okay, so we, there's a lot of problems, when we're talking about this Hiram Lodge number 3, which was an alleged constituted lodge to the African Grand Lodge, whether they want to claim it was 1791 or 1808. And so I just would like for anyone to produce records of a Hiram Lodge number 3 in Providence, Rhode Island, because the only lodge that we found in the records of Africa Lodge is Harmony Lodge number 1. And that was in 1826 when they were actually constituted.
Okay, Brother Eden, Brother John, we've done almost 3 hours, and we have 1-2 more questions. And Brother John, you're fine with that?
Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Brother Isaac has a very interesting point to make. So, Brother Isaac, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. This is probably to add a little bit to the discussion, not to argue, but to probably find solutions to Shree's comment about the 10, 15 years and why was the African Lodge writing in 1924. If we see at the Union officially came into being at the end of December 1813. That doesn't mean that it started working right away. There was the Lodge of Conciliation was formed in order to organize rituals and to tell everyone, hey, you know what? This is the ritual we are going to use. And they took 3 years. That means until 1816, just to set up that kind of system. And then in 1816, they sort of disappeared from the map. Now, there's another development that happened in 1824. Sorry, 1823, which is in October, 2nd of October, 1823, was the constitution or the starting of the Emulation Lodge of Improvement, which was basically concerned in taking those rituals that were finally defined by the Lodge of Conciliation and approved by the Grand Lodge, I'm sorry, not the Grand Lodge, the UGLE, and preserve those things. So maybe they wrote in 1824 because they found out about the Emulation Lodge of Improvement, and because before the Union, not everyone was working the Royal Arch. So they wanted to start working the Royal Arch. So if they can get, instead of the Grand Lodge of England charter that they already had, they wanted probably the one from UGLE so they can prove that the part of the workings and the part of the things that they were allowed to work somehow were also the approved ones by UGLE, which there's the other discussion about the Royal Arch. Is a 4th degree or is the continuation, et cetera, but that's a different story. I'm just putting those dates because those could be interesting for the period with regards to UGLE. 1813, 1816, 1823.
Right. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to actually read the letter because it seems like there's maybe just a small tad bit of misunderstanding of that particular letter. And I'm just looking for it now so that I can read it in its entirety. Because I think it's necessary for us to understand why they wrote in 1824, all right? Because that's the part I think that we're missing here is why did Africa Lodge write in 1824 to the United Grand Lodge of England for a renewal of the charter? And so I'm just going to look for this letter.
And please share it so it is easier.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that, but I want to actually get on that page.
Sure, take your time.
So that I can, here we go. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this so that everybody can see it because I want to make sure that we understand why they wrote. All right, now let's remember the Grand Lodge of England that Africa Lodge was under was in a Masonic war with the Antioch Grand Lodge since their formation. We have to understand this. They were rushing to charter lodges everywhere. There was this war in England between these two Grand Lodges, and it began to sort of come to a head until there was the Articles of Union in 1813 where they came together. Okay, and so we have to imagine during this time how chaotic it was in London and in places in America where these two rival Grand Lodges were chartering lodges. Okay, now again, not every lodge in America was actually knowledgeable of the role erasure of both of these Grand Lodges when they unified. They didn't have any knowledge of this. Now, at this time, they wasn't looking for the Royal Arch. They already had it. Okay? This is very important. This is why I want to read the letter. It says, to the right worshipful, and I'm going to blow it up so everybody can see it because I know it might be a little small. So I want to blow it up here. It says, to the right worshipful, the Grand Master, wardens, and members of the Grand Lodge of England, we, your petitioners, Sampson H. Moody, Peter Howard, Abram Dennerham, John Hilton, James Jackson, Zadok Lew, Samuel G. Gardner, Richard Porter, Lewis Walker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay? 9 named brothers. And anybody that understands the Royal Arch understands the significance of these 9 brothers being mentioned. Okay? They said, in other companions who have been regularly exalted to the sublime degree of Royal Arch Masons. These brothers are not writing as Master Masons. They are writing as Royal Arch Masons. So they're not looking to get a degree, they already got it. The issue is that they're under the impression that the Grand Lodge of England recognizes this degree. But we know that the Grand Lodge of Ireland, you understand what I'm saying? It did not recognize that degree until 1813, right? Because the Antioch Grand Lodge was the one that was actually working this degree. And it says, our worthy and well-beloved brother Prince Hall, Boston Smith, Thomas Sanderson, and several brothers having obtained a warrant from your honorable body on September 29, 1784, when under the government of Thomas Hurd, Earl of Effingham, Lord Howard, etc., acting Grand Master under the authority of His Royal Highness Henry Frederick, Duke of Cumberland, Grand Master of Most Ancient and Honorable Society of Free and Accepted Masons. This warrant allowing us to confer but the 3 degrees, and finding it injurious for the benefits of our body by having no legal authority to confer the other 4 degrees.
Correct.
And understand.
So they,
Go ahead.
you are correct, but just being royal, having been exalted in the Royal Arch, doesn't give them the right to confer the degree of Royal Arch. Now, and that's why they know that their own warrant, the original one, because they were from the moderns and not the ancients, that means that they are not, in quotation marks, allowed to work the degree. So they are asking for, when they saw that they were already the union, there was this, everything was settled and done in England, they say, hey, you know what? Why don't you give us one of the new charters so that shows that we can confer the Royal Arch? That's just my imagination working at this point in time.
That's not your imagination, brother. That's the fact. That's facts. That's not your imagination. You are correct. They are looking for a charter to confer these degrees, and not just the Royal Arch, brother. The other 4. One of them is Knights Templar. The research in America will show what eventually became the York Rite, but one of these degrees was Knights Templar. So we have to understand that there were 4 other degrees that were being worked around Boston, obviously. And these brothers came into contact with these degrees, you understand, and wanted to be able to confer them and was looking for a warrant from the United Grand Lodge of England. And it says, in understanding that the 7 degrees is given under the warrant from the Grand Lodge. It's not. The York Rite, you receive it from the Supreme Grand Chapter. If you wanted to work the Royal Arch, you get that from the Supreme Grand Chapter of the Royal Arch, not the Grand Lodge. You understand what I'm saying? Now, back in the days, lodges used to be allowed to work that degree under their lodge warrant. But with the development of the Supreme Grand chapters, you understand, and the York Rite, those warrants were now to be issued by grand chapters and not grand lodges or lodges. And so this is why I can understand why they were writing, but we can see a little bit of just a little bit of the confusion about how things was actually being worked and where they got the degree, right? Because they're saying that whoever gave them the degrees, let them know that they could get a warrant to do so from the Grand Lodge. So this lets us research what Grand Lodges were issuing warrants to work these degrees, right? And it gives us an idea of where they got this degree. And we therefore humbly solicit the renewal of our charter to otherwise us legally to confer the same, as we are now getting into a flourishing condition, right? Because they were saying that they wasn't. It is with regret that we communicate to you from the decease of our well-loved brethren, and hold up, I'm gonna go back down because I want to read the rest of it. It says, our beloved brethren who obtained the warrant, we have not been able for several years to transmit monies and hold a regular communication. But as we are now permanently established to work conformable to our warrant, meaning the one that's in their hands, and Book of Constitutions, we will send the monies as far as circumstances will admit, together with the money for a new warrant. Should your honorable body think us worthy to receive the same, we remain right worshipful and most worshipful brethren. With all respect due, Samson H. Moody, Peter Howard, C.A. DeRadamine. And this was January 5th, 1824. And I wanted to make sure we read that so we could understand what they were writing for. Number one, they already knew they had a warrant for the first 3 degrees. What they wanted was a warrant for the other 4. They wanted a warrant that would allow them to be able to confer the other 4 degrees. And so that's why they wrote. And so it was purely for degrees outside of the symbolic degrees.
Okay, thank you for that. There is, I guess, final question from Salam. Who gave them those degrees?
That's what we're researching now. We're researching how did Africa Lodge, we know how Philadelphia came in to receiving their degrees because they wrote this in the letter. They received it from Ireland and they received it from England. That's where the brothers in Philadelphia received theirs. In their letter, this is what they wrote. Now, Africa Lodge of Boston, how they came into degrees, and we're talking about the Mark Master's degree, the Past Master's degree, which they had a whole lodge called Africa Lodge of Mark and Past Masters. You know what I mean? Where they, and you had to be a Master Mason to receive these degrees. It stated it in their bylaws, and it's handwritten. We have the records. 1816, they were operating a Mark Lodge under Africa Lodge. And so where they got the degrees, we don't know, but we've been researching it. In fact, I wrote an article on the African Lodge, Mark Lodge, and Past Masters Lodge. I wrote an article about this and gave the research that I had up to that point. And the brother that asked the question, if you give me your email in the private chat, I'll send you that article and see the research that I did up to that point. But who actually gave them degrees? We don't know actually where they received them, but we know they had them. And we know that they was operating. And I'm talking about they were operating a Mark Lodge before they asked for the charter to work the 4 degrees. Okay? They actually had a Mark Lodge operating with bylaws before 1824, and that's very important.
Okay, I guess we're more or less at the end of the official part of the lecture. Okay, before Shri asks the question, I should once again remind all the participants that this is a platform where we have Masons, non-Masons, males, females, young or senior participants, and we would encourage all the participants to use decent language in writing in the public chat, and we would appreciate in future if you want to express your opinions. Of course, be more be more mindful how you express yourself. Nothing bad has happened. There is no need to remove anyone, but bring up a little bit higher the standard of expressing your opinions. That'll be my kind of humble recommendation for all the participants who may need this recommendation. So, Brother Sri, floor is yours at the moment. You're free to go.
Thank you, David, and thank you for that timely reminder. I think everyone should be mindful of that and be a little more civil. But my question was for Brother John. You mentioned the 4 degrees that they were asking for. So, I mean, they obviously were working the 3 degrees under the original warrant. And then by some way, you said that they were also working the mark degree, right? In a separate, and you mentioned that they were looking for the Royal Arch, but what are the 4 degrees actually that they were asking permission to work? Which were the other 3? So one was Royal Arch, I assume, and you mentioned, I think, one more.
Knights Templar, Royal Arch, Mark,
Sorry?
and Most Excellent Master.
Okay, okay. And insofar as the Royal Arch and the Mark degrees, which they were already, the Mark they were definitely working, and perhaps they were working 1 or 2 of the other degrees as well, if I understood you correctly.
Say that again now.
So they were working, apart from the 3 craft degrees, they were working the Mark degrees, and they could possibly have also been working other degrees as well, is what your research tells you?
So now in the records, we've only found proof of the Mark degree, the Past Master degree, as a degree, not like passing the chair for the Worshipful Master. We're talking about an actual degree. Called
I am aware of it. Yeah.
A whole lodge called a Past Master's Lodge. That degree and the Royal Arch. Okay. And so we know that they had been working these degrees. And when we look at those 4 degrees, we know that they had them. You understand? What we don't find proof in the records of Africa Lodge of Knights Templar being worked. We only find the degrees that I mentioned that we could say, oh, they're working those. And they were being worked in Philadelphia as well. We can see it. Like they're saying this lodge is dedicated for this degree. You know what I mean? And they're conferring these degrees, you know. Then we find the bylaws for the Mark Lodge and the Past Masters Lodge, you know. So we those are the things that we can say that we can prove that they were working.
You think it would have been possible that because it was such a time of volatility that perhaps they just got the degree from some other lodges, maybe even the Irish lodges which were there, or some of the other mainstream lodges, something like that, or some traveling Masons or something of that sort, and they just adopted it and worked it?
Possible. We just can't state definitively. We could speculate and say, hey, they got it from the lodges in Boston, which is my opinion. You know what I mean? But which one, how, where, who, and when, that's something that we have not found at this time. So the only thing that we can do is sort of show connections and allow the reader to draw their conclusions from those. So that's what I did in my article on the Mark Lodge, because I showed how the Mark degree came into America, show how it spread it into New England. So I know that it was being worked in New England very heavy, and then how, you know, it could have been possible for them to have received it, because there's nowhere in their writings where they say, we received these degrees from right here. You know what I mean? So we can only speculate, but we do know that they was working them, because we have the meeting minutes where they were working those degrees, and we have a whole set of bylaws for a whole entire lodge that was actually meeting. A Mark Lodge, which was a fascinating find for me, because, you know, I was also, you know, I'm Royal Arch as well. So, you know, yeah, I'm Royal Arch as well. So it was like, for me to find that in their records was amazing. It was amazing. Yeah.
Oh, okay, brother. Okay, Brother Sri, thank you so much. And there is another question from YouTube channel from Brother Ayers. From the historical record, who is the first Black Grand Lodge in North America? I guess that question was from the last lecture as well, but for this recording as well, let's share your opinion about that.
Well, the first lodge of African American Masons in America, of course, was Africa Lodge number 1. Africa Lodge number 459. We have found no other lodge composed wholly of Black Masons in America prior to that time.
Okay, answers taken. I guess I can start concluding by a very interesting remark. As today we've been discussing the politics in the research, and you had very interesting, not only interesting, you kind of nailed all the points out there that's been made by the authors. There is interesting remark by a brother that has been shared with us. Politics is the art of looking for trouble, finding it everywhere, diagnosing it incorrectly, and applying the wrong remedies. Groucho Marx.
Who said that? What's his name?
Groucho Marx was the author of those words. So there you are.
There you go.
There you go. There you go. They knew it in the ancient times as well. So
Very good.
thank you for sharing. And I will just check last messages if there was any question. So we play fair. No, there have been a lot of interesting remarks, exchanges of ideas. I will remind all the participants that the chat can be saved for your later reference. So please do so if you are interested. Brother John, I should raise the request I received from several participants from the last lecture and from this lecture, if possible, of course. It's up to your decision. If the slides can be shared in PDF to circulate them for the participants and in our groups. If you're fine with that.
So here's how we can do it.
Yeah.
Again, and these will be my last remarks, and I'm gone. And then you take it and then close it out. That way, because I know you're going to ask me for last remarks. So I'm just going to say this.
Those are your final remarks then.
Okay. So remember, this is Landmarks of Our Fathers. This is the first book that I wrote, Landmarks of Our Fathers. Brother David is going to put the links in the description of the YouTube. So anybody that wants to go there and get it, you'll know how to order this book. This is examination of the white paper that was written in response to the white paper from the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. That will also be in there. Also the link for international, because the last time, I think it was Brother Colin who stated the fact that the book patch was charging over $120 something for shipping. I sent Brother David the answer from PayPal when I actually asked them why were they charging such an exorbitant amount of money for shipping and handling, because it was discouraging international brothers from being able to purchase the book. They sent me their answer, said it was due to COVID, and that certain places like UPS was not shipping all the way across seas at this point. So the shipping and handling was that much. So what I did for the international brothers to be able to purchase the book without having to pay those exorbitant amounts, I went and put an international purchasing place on my website, which will also be in the description of the YouTube channel, where if you are overseas, you can order the book through the international link where I control the shipping and handling, because I can't control how much, charge you for shipping and handling with the book patch, but I wanted to be able to make it more reasonable for the brothers, because I don't think that they're using the United States Postal Service, which is a lot cheaper. They should, but they're not. Book patch is using UPS, and that's the reason why they're charging it, because that's what UPS is charging. But I wanted to make sure that you could get the rates for United States Postal Service, so I put a link and added the page on my landmarksofourfathers.com website. So if you're international, if you live internationally outside of the continental United States, you can order the book from there. And it'll be much cheaper than trying to pay all that money in shipping. So that way you can order the book there. So yes, Also, if you provide me your email, and hopefully my email will be in that description as well. John Hairston 357 at gmail.com. It'll be in the YouTube description. If you send me an email requesting the slides to either one of the lectures, I'll make sure that you get those slides as well. And thank you so much, Brother David, again, man.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Again, just to tell everyone that the invitation letter that has been circulated for this particular lecture of today already includes everything that Brother John just mentioned. All three options are there. In addition, if you go to the lecture that has been already posted there, the last lecture with Brother John already has in the description all these three links. So all the international kind of shipping and handling issue has been solved, or at least kind of suggested by Brother John, and it is there. So I did my homework quite well, and as soon as this lecture is over and everything will be uploaded to YouTube for tomorrow, I will of course put the same description and the links in this under this video as well. So you're more than welcome to do that. So as I understand, the slides contain the information that are making part of the book. It would be, of course, advisable you just go and support Brother John's research by buying his book, his comments on the white papers, and keep him running to do other researches as well, because it takes a lot of efforts, it takes a lot of time. We all understand to write a book and to make such wonderful conclusions. So again, and he generously agreed that in particular cases, if anyone as an exception wants to get slides, you can contact him directly, and you'll right there he wrote his email again in the public chat, so you can note it down and contact him directly for that. So again, having said that, I will just look around if there is any question. Brother John, absolutely brilliant presentation. Just a clarification, I asked for the historical record of the first Black Grand Lodge in North America, not lodge. Is it correct that East Africa Grand Lodge, PA? Brother John, the question was not regarding the first lodge, but first Grand Lodge, Black Grand Lodge. Could you, so the author is restating his question. Could you elaborate on that? Which one is the first one?
Right, the first African-American Grand Lodge in America was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And it was actually constituted December the 28th, 1850. I know that we've heard that, you know, it was in Boston, Massachusetts, but the first African-American Grand Lodge in America was Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was called African Grand Lodge of Free and Accepted Masons in and for the jurisdiction of North America, and initially changed their name to First Independent African Grand Lodge of North America. And so it's Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Okay, so Brother Ayers, yes, Ayers, the answer is taken and confirmed that it was in Pennsylvania. So I guess I can conclude the official part of the lecture by saying thank you so much, Brother John. I mean, you not only brought additional details to our international audience to understand more about the Prince Hall, but you went into so interesting details, which is challenged by kind of mainstream Prince Hall, not all of them, but some of them as such, and you even faced the response that they issued, and it is I mean, it brings up a lot light for international audience who is quite far away from the events, which was in the United States, and we may not have been part of this social context which you were explaining, and we only just now see how many more is there to learn, why they exist, like in both in every single state. Why do you have 2 PH and mainstream Grand Lodges, and where it started, and where it came from. And you just changed many things in last lecture regarding where it started actually, and who Prince Hall was, and who those guys were who did that. So awesome. Excellent job, excellent work, excellent recording we made, and of course it is available out there freely. You can share it anywhere, anyone can download it, there is no limits. And if Sapere Aude is anyhow mentioned anywhere, we'll be just so glad to brought this issue to attention of international audience and viewers. So thank you so much. Today is 23rd of August 2020. This was Sapere Aude lecture number 67 this time. So this concludes the official part of the lecture.